It is 12:34. I'd like to call this meeting back into session. The next case on the agenda is case number 2021G-005, Hicks versus Schmidt.
Correct, Madam Chair. This is a continuation of the matter that was started on May 4th. When we continued to today as the matter was coming to a conclusion. Sorry, no, you're fine. It's just me with all of those papers. Preliminarily today, before we take some testimony, because I'm hoping we get to some testimony, there are a couple of motions pending for the commission to consider. One would be a motion from Mr. Hicks, who is challenging the order that I circulated, granting Mr. O'Brien's motion to eliminate and granting the motion to quash that was submitted on behalf of Brian Katz. We should take that motion up first. We could take up the motion of Mr. O'Brien before that, if you wanted to do so, where he was moving to dismiss the case based on certain contact that Mr. Hicks has had with the chair and vice chair. We could take that second, or we could go ahead and deal with that. My recommendation on that particular issue would be to deny the motion because the statutory preclusions are really pertinent to the commission members. I appreciate Mr. O'Brien when we make that motion. If we ever get to a point where it's challenging the decision of the commission, I guess that could be an element of an appeal. But I don't believe that, while I don't believe it's appropriate to contact commission members based on the provisions that are in the statute, I think the preclusions are more on the commission members than they are concerning sufficient to dismiss a case. I've let it on for a while. However, you, Madam Chair, and the members would like to proceed, we can proceed.
Madam Chair, can I just make a comment on that motion to dismiss and the contact made with the chair and vice chair of this commission? Neither one of us responded or entertained any interaction with the
May I make a comment or no?
I don't think at this point. So we should take the motion to, I don't have that in front of me, I apologize.
Which one?
The motion to dismiss based on the contact.
Right there.
Okay.
That's what I thought. It was just again.
So what action do I need to propose on that?
Well, my recommendation is to deny the motion to dismiss.
And so commission,
So moved. Second.
okay, we have a motion that's been duly, a motion on the floor that's been duly seconded. All in favor of this motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries with a vote of 7-0. So you're taking care of the motion to dismiss.
Thank you. Did the other motion? That's okay. I'll find you here in a second. Move the papers. Essentially, the next motion is Mr. Hicks' motion to overturn, or for the commission to overturn my order on the motion to eliminate and the motion to quash. That's the other issue. That's the other motion that we need to take. Mr. Hicks is the movement, can certainly have additional opportunity to briefly address it. Mr. O'Brien is here, he can address as well, as could Mr. Kelly, Philip Kelly, who is with the Office of the Attorney General, who represents Brian Katz from the Secretary of State's office.
continue to get your proceeding, if you get your voucher and then get your stamp for that.
I do. There's, two things I want to address with this. You can read all the stuff that's been submitted around it. But the first one, and I have these, I'm glad to give them out. These are copies of two previous orders of the Ohio Election Commission that took place back in the Freeman case. And in one of them took place during the discovery period and was signed by Mr. Ricker. And one of them took place during the hearing period and was signed by, at the time, Commissioner Beatty. Okay, and it was something that was heard. And it was something that was heard before the whole commission. But in the order that was done where Mr. Ricker signed off on it, he actually gives a description in the order as to what his authority is to issue an order. And this is, I saw Kurt Hartman do it, say, Chris, do you know these? But these are the two orders that I'm drafting, using it as an example. This is one point. This is basically saying the order itself is improper in the first place, because the executive director or the staff attorney does not have the authority to give an order outside the discovery period. The other orders outside the discovery period have to be from the commission itself, not from the executive director. So once he hands those out, I'll point to the section that I think is pertinent, where Mr. Ricker describes his own authority. So the one that is dated, oh, you want to get done? I sent you copies, so. So the one that's dated July 21st, 2021. Third paragraph, this is the one that was issued during the discovery period. And Mr. Ricker describes his authority here. Ohio Administrative Code 3517109B, same authority he cites in the order that he issued, allows the staff attorney to do all acts in furtherance of the interest, purposes, and procedures on behalf of the commission through the discovery process. This order is intended to clarify which issues are pending before the commission that has arisen during discovery. And the authority that was cited by the executive director to have the order in the first place is part of the Ohio Administrative Code relating to its authority in the discovery process. So that's point one, is I don't think the order was proper. Whether the order is right or wrong, I'm just making the point that outside the discovery process, that orders, he does not have the authority to issue an order, and orders need to be processed by the commission, which if you look at the other, doesn't have a date at the top, but the other order that says, order of the Ohio Election Commission says June 25th in the first line. This is an order that was during a hearing period, and you'll see it was considered by the whole commission, and the vice chair who was acting as the chair for purposes of this, signed off on the order. So that's my point, is that the order was improper in the first place. In the second place, let me hit two things. First is the Mr. Katz testimony. So, Mr. Katz, Gene Schmidt, not me, testified.
This is not as good as it gets.
Gene Schmidt testified in the last hearing on the I think it was 4th of May. 4th of May, repeatedly to multiple conversations he had had with Brian Katz relating to the reporting of subject expenses to this that are involved, that have gotten tied up with this inquiry. So she repeatedly referenced multiple conversations. And then I could point to the specific exhibits, but the two notes that have been provided, one by originally Mrs. Schmidt, her husband, in the note talks about discussions. Okay? The one provided by Katz says, we don't give advice, but it says, as I told you in our discussion. So the notion that his testimony is not relevant, or that what was actually discussed is not relevant and can't be subject to cross-examination. She's put forward the assertion that she did it properly because Brian Katz on multiple occasions discussed with her how to report this. I don't know what that all entails, but that was her assertion, not mine. I didn't make that assertion, she did. And now I'm simply asking to be able to cross-examine Brian Katz on what exactly is true or not true. I mean, he could come up, he could be testifying and say, I never had any conversations with any of them. Okay, or I had a conversation where I said, I won't talk to you, and hung up the phone. But the representation made by Mrs. Schmidt, not me, both in email and testimony, is that she had these offline conversations, not one but multiple, with Brian Katz. And specifically on how to report this. So for example, and I'm glad to play back, I got set up here, I can play it back from the last meeting. She said, I had prior conversations with Mr. Katz on how to do this long before my husband sent this email. Prior. One of the things the Secretary of State will not do, are very cautious about doing, is putting anything in writing. That was her words. I'm glad to play back the testimony from I have the video here of that testimony. They basically tell you everything over the phone, and you have to copy it down. We put this in writing to document the fact that we really have been trying to pay this debt and trying to do it correctly and consistently with the law. So she's making a representation that I got advice from Brian Katz offline that's not documented through multiple discussions, not just the one that her husband refers to. And I asked merely, well, then I would like to ask Brian Katz about these discussions. She also made the assertion that the discussions, that they were done without documentation, specifically to not have documentation. So the notion, first off, I go to the first thing, the order of the executive director was not supported by, in the first place. He can only do orders like that during the discovery period, not during a hearing. But the second thing, the notion that Brian Katz is not a relevant witness, that I deserve the right to cross-examine, is crazy. She's made the assertion that she talked, I feel like I'm beating an obvious horse. The respondent is the one who made the assertion that she had multiple offline conversations that are undocumented with Brian Katz relating to her campaign finance reporting. And why is this important? I'll tell you why it's so important. Because at the heart of my complaint is that there were compensated professional services that were received in kind that were not reported. She's already also made the insinuation that this David Goldstein invoice, if you remember this, your brain cells, you don't remember this David Goldstein invoice, somehow it might have been plussed up for some of this. It might have been this, it might have been that. So how it was described, how it was the discussion on it, what was this invoice, because I don't believe it was plussed up. I think that might become a convenient attempted excuse, is that, well, we didn't report this, but maybe this invoice was plussed up for it, and that's why we didn't report it otherwise. And to my point, I'm very transparent in where I'm going and what I'm thinking and why I think something's important. The notion that I'm not allowed to discuss it with bring Brian Katz in, is the height, to me, of just crazy. He clearly is relevant. So I brought up point one. The executive director or staff attorney, as it is in your, exceeded his authority in the order in the first place. It's not a valid order. Part two, Brian Katz is absolutely a relevant witness by any standard of rules of evidence or being able to question him when the respondent is the one who has claimed to have discussions with him about her campaign finance reporting that are not documented anywhere. And even all of the email evidence provided of it, both emails refer to discussions that took place at some point in time. And then the third thing on the motion about Mrs. Schmidt's last issues with in my view, of reporting compensated professional services. You know, I provided in my thing, I think, 4 or 5 different of the rules of evidence that this relates to. So, you can't come in and just say, here say, he's a bad guy. But this is past practice, habit, should have known better, should have known. These are all rules of evidence things of why certain areas are subject to questioning. I'm not asking her about her care of her dog. Did you ever abuse your dog, or did you do this or do that? It's particularly pertinent because as I said, I'm not going to rattle through it here, but I cited a bunch of rules of evidence. In the director's order, if you guys think about the director's order, I don't even know what to make of it. It never cites any rules of evidence. It never cites one rule of evidence. And then it says that the prior testimony, his request was effectively that all the prior testimony be stricken and this is not legit. That was his motion, and that was granted But then in the order from the executive director, it says, that will be considered by the board members. Well, if you grant his motion, then that means you're not supposed to consider it. So it's very confusing to me, is that the motion itself, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm just going from memory, you know, you can look at it and it refers to, you know, the testimony that took place so far, you know, that'll be considered by the commission. Well, if the motion is granted, then you're not supposed to consider it. And I think it's highly relevant. I think it also now is, if you remember where we left this, was that there was supposedly a legal agreement that prohibited Ms. Schmidt from discussing her prior issue with not reporting professional services that were given in kind to her campaign. Legal, and that was where we left that last meeting. You know, we're supposed to have a get together or something and talk about, you know, what was this legal agreement? Was it legit? Was it not? And now this is the way just to evade that whole question. Because I think there's another question now that has arisen because of that prior testimony is, was it a lie? Is there actually any legal agreement? Okay, by the way, one of the other reasons why evidence is admissible to ask questions is because the actual FEC documents on that prior event are public records, and that's something you can question people on. You know, I've given like 5 different rules of evidence that apply to them, and I think a very compelling case. So let me net it out. You've probably read the stuff, hopefully you've read the stuff, you know, and paid close attention to it. But first off, the order was outside the authority of the executive director in the first place. Second off, the notion that Brian Katz is not a witness that could be asked about conversations that she brought up. I never brought them up. It's her exhibit that brought up doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I provided a ton of rules of evidence, and I'm a little confused by an order that says, I'm granting a motion that says you should not strike all this stuff, but on the other hand, in the motion it says the commissioners will consider it. You know, it doesn't make any sense. So that's my discussion / presentation to all this. I think that, I think the order should be ruled. If you're asking me, nobody's asking me, but if you ask me what you should do, is that order is not valid. There needs to be some structure here. That the section on orders, his own words say that authority is during the discovery process, not during the hearing process. So the order is invalid. I think that Mr. Katz is an absolutely relevant witness. You know, given I'm just responding to her representations in this. And I think that the questioning on prior cases of her not reporting in-kind compensated professional services by like 5 different rules of evidence are all valid. So I don't see the order as being legitimate, and I hope this commission will reverse that order, and that then we can make sure that we can have, you know, I'm not asking like, hey, decide that I'm right and she's wrong. I'm just asking that we have a fair process. That's all I'm asking, that we have a fair process, and not some orders that are outside the authority of the executive director that do things like not allow cross-examination of somebody who's been put forward by her as a basis for why what she did was okay, and not let people walk from what could have been a false statement made under oath about a supposed legal agreement relating to what can be talked about and what can't. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the commission. In the first instance, this problem can be solved very easily if the commission members, one or more, would make a motion to adopt as a commission's order Mr. Richter's order that he issued without regard to whether he had authority to issue. In the first place, it was very reasonable, rational. Mr. Richter's been here 25, 30 years that I recollect, and he knows what he's doing. He assessed the legality of it, and at least as to the authority of Mr. Katz, albeit to the Attorney General, but I think the only thing I would say is merely because Ms. Schmidt said that she talked to Mr. Katz doesn't entitle him to subpoena him as a witness. And I would also say that if she didn't file a report and report the disputed debt with constant content that the lawyer was trying to collect and was here going to tell you, or I have told you, is I didn't report it because Brian Katz told me I didn't have to, then I might side with Mr. Hicks here, but she reported it. It was a disputed debt. She reported it as a disputed debt on her prior report. She then contacted the Attorney General, and as the email reflects, Attorney General said, we can't give legal advice, talk to your lawyer. And her husband, who's her treasurer, said, well, we just want to do what's right here. And they did do what was right. They filed a report. They listed the original invoice for $39,000, the disputed invoice they paid, and at least in my view, it wasn't something that could be justified by the person submitting it, but nevertheless, to negotiate it out, it was paid. That $20,260 was reported on the report, and not only that, the treasurer went back 3 reports and amended reports to reflect, okay, I didn't know about this before, I have found about it, I disputed it, I negotiated, I paid it, and on the next report reflected that, but then went back to 3 reports. So, I think that first we can solve the no authority problem by the commission adopting Mr. Richter's order. Secondly, on Mr. Katz, I believe that what he has to say is not relevant because it was reported, and we're certainly not saying that he told her she didn't have to. And then the motion in limine, I filed that because I believe that it memorialized how the chair had ruled on my objections. And you'll remember, I don't want to sit here and object to every question Mr. Hicks asks that's improper, because that would extend the hearing longer than needed to be. And so I put a continuing objection to all questions in a certain area, and that was granted by the chair, and Mr. Hicks ignored it. He continued to ask something about some Turkish embassy deal, something that happened 20 years ago, this legal settlement that occurred. And I would correct the record, there was no finding that she failed to report improper in-kind contributions. There were allegations and lawsuits about it, and that's why she's saying they were settled. And as a result of the settlement, I was advised I shouldn't be talking about it in the future, because people might come back and file another lawsuit, because settlements like that typically have an NDA, or non-disclosure agreement. So I think she had a legitimate concern there, and I merely wanted to have an order issued today so we don't spend the rest of today and for the next 3 meetings this commission has talking about things that have nothing to do with this case. As Mr. Richter said in his proposed order, I'll call it, for the commission to adopt, those don't have anything to do with the pre-primary, post-primary, or subsequent Goldstein collecting for constant content issue. That they happened 20 years ago, they don't have anything to do with this case, and so let's deal with only relevant issues. So with that, I have nothing further. Thank you. Unless there are questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and members of this commission. My name's Phil Kelly. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Katz. I just want to point to two, maybe 3 issues with Mr. Hicks' motion. First and foremost, Mr. Richter did act within his authority in properly quashing the subpoena. Mr. Hicks points to a provision in the administrative code that essentially grants the staff attorney power to do all acts in furtherance of discovery matters. But this neglects another provision within the administrative code which allows the staff attorney to quash overly burdensome subpoenas. This is a completely separate provision from the discovery matter that Mr. Hicks is referring to. This provision, if I could specifically enumerate it, is 3517-1-11, subsection B3A. This specifically allows Mr. Richter to issue orders pertaining to subpoena matters. Secondly, relative to the motion is very untimely and honestly should not be considered by this commission today. Provisions of the administrative code requires a motion to be filed within 7 days, business days prior to the date set for the hearing. And relative motion was filed on Monday, July 17th, approximately 3 days ago. Relator's motion is also improper under the administrative code because he's essentially requesting that this commission reconsider Mr. Richter's findings on the subpoena issue. The administrative code specifically says no party adversely affected by a finding, the commission may request reconsideration of that finding unless there's a specific provision. There's no specific provision that I have seen. And lastly, as to the merits of the subpoena ducis tecum asks for testimony about all documents and communications in printed form. Mr. Hicks is now discussing conversations that allegedly happened outside, verbal conversations. This is completely outside of the subpoena's request. The subpoena request testimony about communications in printed form. Verbal conversations are outside the subpoena, and so any purported conversations that happened are irrelevant to this matter. And as you can see in the exhibits provided in the motion to quash, Mr. Katz informed Schmidt that the office cannot provide legal advice about the extent of the communications. Again, any verbal conversations are outside the subpoena. Thank you.
Mr. Hicks?
So, just to correct a few things, the section that he just mentioned, well, first off, an order is not a finding. So a finding is like, you had a violation, that's a finding. Okay, an order or a motion is not a finding. Secondly, 35171-11 says a party may file, by the way, I printed out a reference back of authenticated copies of the actual OAC and so forth on the issues that might come up today, so if you guys want to have them, I have copies. It says a party may file request issuance of subpoenas, and subpoenas do as take them, and shall do so in a timely manner. All subpoenas shall be issued by the state attorney to the commission unless a timely motion to quash is filed with the commission. If in a reasonable, if you read that section, okay, what it is that when I notified on the 5th, the day after our last hearing, him of the subpoenas I wanted to have issued, okay, I'm sorry, the executive director and our respondents counsel of the subpoenas that I wish to have issued, that was time for the respondent to question the issuance. The actual section that he cited as subpoenas is referring to prior to the issuance of a subpoena. Prior to the issuance of a subpoena. Once a subpoena is issued, and those of you that were on the commission before, I only know the commission from when I've been coming to meetings, all motions to quash subpoenas that had already been issued by the executive director were heard before the commission. And I could go pull orders on that also, okay? So he had, Mr. O'Brien had, because I think I could pull them up, but I think the subpoenas were issued on about the 25th or 26th of May. So he had 3 weeks to object to a subpoena that I wish to have issued. The executive director issued the subpoena. That takes this off the table. This is about, it does not, this refers to before the issuance of a subpoena. Once a subpoena has been issued and somebody has a motion to quash, it's like, as those of you who were on the commission before, I know some a lot of new faces, but those motions to quash always have been heard before the commission, not by just some order, okay? So there's a set of things, and I provided, I could pull up and provide. My request was for just a subpoena for Brian Katz. And then there was a do as taken part to bring any correspondence you've had with these people. I could pull it, I started to try to pull it up and look at it. This notion that it said, like, I only asked for him to testify on the documents he was going to bring is completely false. And no other, I think there were only 2 of 8 subpoenas I asked any do as taken part to bring something with you, Mr. Goldstein and Mr. Katz. And all the other ones, I never said what I was going to question them on. Just I want to witness subpoena issued to this person. So this notion that I somehow, first off, I don't issue the subpoenas. Mr. Richter does. I make the request, and the commission issues the subpoenas. And I could pull up to see what the face of the subpoena said, but this is kind of a red herring notion that The subpoena was, meant I only wanted to talk about documents he was gonna bring with him. Would be contrary to the email I sent requesting subpoenas, and I haven't pulled it up, but I'm guessing it's probably contrary to the face of the subpoena itself, as to what actually happened. So I think that's why I printed out all these authenticated rules and stuff, because today, I'm like, we gotta stick to some rules here, and not make stuff up or create innuendo about the rules. And like I said, I don't know if you guys said this, but I welcome, anytime a rule gets brought up, I 100% welcome that we look at the rule, and what does the rule actually say? So I don't think anything about, what's been said. And by the way, the last thing I'm gonna say, Mr. O'Brien just entered a bunch of testimony about the prior event involving Ms. Schmidt, that there was no finding of violation, there was no this, there was no that. I would say that most of what he said was not correct. Okay, but these are the little slippery tricks. Okay, so he tried to put testimony in that this was not a real thing, it didn't happen, it was 20 years ago. I think it got finally adjudicated in 2016 or something, so that's not 20 years ago. Okay, so this is not good. And the point is, it's a relevant area of questioning, and you can't have a situation where then he can enter testimony. And if we go back to the actual hearing, I don't think there was an objection ruled upon, the questioning continued. And then eventually we said, we're gonna stop till we figure out whether there's an order, a agreement somewhere that says that you can't talk about this anymore. There was never a ruling. And I want to point out too is, in prior hearings, with respect to the chair, one of the parts of the hearings was designating an attorney separate from the chair to rule on objections. If you remember, Mr. Norman, performed that function in the past, and I think that would be good for him to have here, to have an attorney that's separate from the chair that actually rules on objections, and that we get actual rulings on the record as to whether an objection was, Mr. Norman did a good job of whenever objections came up, they were either sustained or overruled consistently and clearly. And I don't know, I could go search on the video transcript of the last meeting, I don't know the words, sustained or overruled were used that often when it came to objections that were levied. So I just wanted to clean up some of the stuff that was just said, in terms of what the truth is, in terms of what the rules actually say, and this, and I stand by all of my prior comments.
Mr. O'Brien, do you have anything in response to that?
So I recollect the chair did tell Mr. Hicks more than once, quote, move on, that after I objected, I don't know, because I don't have the transcript or the recording right here in front of me, but it's clear to me that Mr. Hicks was being told to move on, and he ignored that direction from the chair. Whether you use the word objection sustained, I can't affirmatively say, but it's clear to me that he was being told to move on, and in fact, we ended the hearing, as you recollect, by him saying, I refuse to move on. And so that's the only thing I would say.
Thank you.
What would you like to address? I don't recall the specifics of what was going on, but I do know that there were various objections that were approved, and certainly we came to a conclusion at the end where Ms. Schmidt, was indicating she wasn't going to answer as it related to that set of circumstances, and we stopped consideration at that time. I don't know if there was anything more specific that was stated, as I recall, concerning those particular circumstances. Sorry, I don't know what I had to do.
How will you handle objections during this meeting?
Oh, as it relates to going forward, you and I have had a conversation where I will generally move or act on objections as they are submitted to us and go forward from there.
So that's how we'll conduct this meeting in regards to objections. As Mr. Richter obviously is our staff attorney and is the attorney representing us on the board, so.
What, is the order going to be followed that he issued or adopted or ignored, or how are we proceeding?
We haven't gone on that yet.
Oh, okay.
No decision has been made there.
Okay, well, I thought that's what the chair was
No.
addressing.
No, just objections as they,
Go forward on other issues.
exactly.
Okay,
If
thank you.
this hearing, if an objection comes up, we will handle it, and Mr. Richter will handle those objections, so. As far as the motion in front of us, do any commissioners have questions on what we've heard and what we've read? Mr. Richter, will you tell us again what your recommendation on this motion?
Well, certainly I issued the order, I believe I have authority, I believe I have authority to do so. And my efforts in that regard are primarily because I just want to see the matter move forward. And my belief is that it may not have been wonderfully worded, I will certainly admit to that. But I don't believe, with all due respect to the arguments presented this morning, and I've read the materials that were submitted prior to issuing the order, that as it relates to the issues that we have pending before us in terms of, you know, the propriety or impropriety of in-kind contributions and the nature of the expenditure that was made to Mr. Goldstein on behalf of Constant Content, I didn't see that Mr. Katz's testimony would elucidate anything of value as it related to that aspect of the case. So that's why I granted the motion to quash. And as it related to the motion in limine, I think, you know, we spent almost 3 hours, as I recall, maybe even more than that, hearing testimony from Ms. Schmidt. I think Mr. Hicks did a reasonable job of presenting the circumstances surrounding Ms. Schmidt's history and what went on there. And then in the motion that he submitted in opposition to Mr. O'Brien's motion in limine, there was an outline of the circumstances that involved what he was trying to get testimony as it related to. I shared that with all of you, so you have that available to you. You could read that and see what the essence of that was. Going further into that, I didn't believe was beneficial for the commission in terms of, I didn't believe it was beneficial for the commission to go over that all over again and just slow down the process of trying to get to evidence on the issues that we're looking at today in terms of the in-kind contributions and whether there should have been something listed there, or the payment to Mr. Goldstein. And I'm merely trying to get us moving and get us to a point where we can get good, valid information as it relates to those particular issues. I'll be glad to answer any questions if the commission has other questions.
Any questions or commissioners at this point?
The current motion before us is dismissal, is that?
No, we decided that motion. The motion pending before us is whether, it concerns my order, the order that I issued. And essentially whether the commission wants to reconsider that and make a different decision, or I guess you could say allow it to stand. One of the ways, the way Mr. O'Brien addressed it in terms of endorsing it, or if the commission decides it wants to go in a different direction, certainly, and overrule that and go their own way, that's certainly within the realm of possibility. It's your commission members' determination and choice as to how you proceed.
Mr. Hicks had, in the last line, said the updated order should be withdrawn and both motions should be heard before the full commission and denied. That's what's before us, so. So the motion is for full commission review of the undated order of the executive director. That's the motion, is the motion.
So I have a question. So we have two motions, one eliminate, one quash, right? Correct?
Those are the two motions on
Combining.
which I submitted the order on. I combined the
So
two.
you
in my
combine,
order.
okay, so we don't have to do it separately.
I don't believe so, no.
If you allow it to stand, the question is whether you allow the motion to stand or recommend a different path.
The order.
Nominate the freshman member of the
deny the motion for reconsideration.
We have a motion on the floor. We have a motion on the floor, it's been moved and seconded, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries by a vote of 7-0. So at this time, we will go into the actual presentation of the case. So,
And I will add just, do we know who's actually here physically close?
Witnesses?
Yeah.
Well, I think Ms. Schmidt was being examined by Mr. Hicks, and I
Okay.
gathered that that would continue until he was done with her. There are 3 witnesses, Mr.
That's what I'm getting to. Mr. Hicks, where do you plan on proceeding from here, Mr. Hicks?
Ms. Schmidt, and then there's potentially 4 witnesses that.
No, I understand. I mean, I know, I presume Mr. Caraway is probably outside because he left the commission here. But the other 3 persons are, I guess, in their office
in the
down
building.
below.
Yeah, but
And so,
I think I still have, and because some of these things are some reasonable questioning for Ms. Schmidt, and then we can, then get these other people. I think the other 3 people are,
Fitzmalton or Fitzmartin?
yeah, I think that they will be fairly quick, and then they can be excused and they won't have to return if there's any future hearing. But I still have questions for Ms. Schmidt.
Okay. I guess let's have Ms. Schmidt here.
Do you want, like we did before, where we moved the lectern over here for him to speak and put the witness in the middle? Would that be easiest? That's what we did at the last.
Yeah, it's in the middle, so I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Let me wheel the lectern over here for him to
Very good. Oh, they're not good.
I don't understand it.
I said, let the young guy help. Not me.
But I didn't know you.
Yeah, that's the last choice. It's like you
Somebody will have.
It worked. It's my meeting. I can put the chair there.
Acceptable?
You're just on top of it.
My other reason for asking the question was I just wanted to see if we needed to be in contact with anybody down at the library, so. obviously it's not right at this point.
And I printed out copies of my new exhibits. I don't know if you did also, or
When you say new exhibits,
the exhibits I submitted for, it's labeled A through J or whatever.
are those the ones that were originally a part of?
There were a set from 5-4, and there's a set for the witnesses for this hearing. That I provided you like the day before he provided it, so like on
This week.
yeah, so the day before he
I
provided it.
have not printed those out at this point, no. Because okay, no.
Okay, well, here they are.
Well, do we need them right now for Ms. Schmidt, or should we just wait
Yeah.
until the?
Yeah, so I want to have you guys have them, so we're not dealing
Oh,
with.
okay.
And you should have the ones that I previously, I did not reprint those.
Yes.
But I lettered these versus numbering, so, and I put a sheet at the front that is a cross-reference to the exhibits I provided and at least Mr. O'Brien's exhibits from the last, up to the last year.
And at least for the record, I indicated to Mr. Richter and Mr. Hicks, I had some objections to them, so at least until we would decide objections on exhibits F, G, and J,
We want to, I think normally in the process here, what I've seen is people provide exhibits, but they may or may not be referred to, they may or may not be admitted. So the question is it appropriate to object to exhibits that have not been admitted?
it's not appropriate for fact finders to see exhibits before they're admitted in any building, any court, any administrative hearing. So as commission members may be going through what you just handed them, they should not be seeing things that aren't going to be admitted into evidence, Mr. Hicks, so that's why I am raising it in advance. is in the
Okay.
horses
Duly
out the
noted, but
barn.
if you don't.
Yeah, and I just to clarify that, if you remember, those of you that are on the commission and previous commissions, there's actually orders of the commission that exhibits have to be provided before the hearing, before, so this,
Provided to Mr. Richter, not provided to commission members.
we can go back. and
Are
look
we,
at the-
are we ready?
Yes. Okay. So I think I have, Ms. Schmidt, 7 areas to hit before we're done, okay, with you. Is you, and that,
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, I think probably you should be sworn. You probably should have been sworn through me.
I was one before.
Yeah, he was.
Oh, you was?
Yeah.
Okay, well then reminding you that you're sworn, I think we probably should swear.
Will you swear me?
Yeah, just because it's been,
Do you want to do a Bible? No, just raise the hand.
2.5 months.
Where the testimony will be the proceeding will be the chair. The whole chair, and I'm going to choose about that.
Yes.
So,
So, Madam Chair, before Mr. Hicks begins, I have a procedural question. So, on the exhibits, obviously, this time Mr. Hicks has followed the rules and done it properly. We didn't say anything last time, but his other exhibits were numbered and they should have been lettered. And respondents were numbered, which they were supposed to be. This time he has lettered them, which is correct. So my concern is just knowing how exhibits work. Are we gonna have confusion with the exhibits from 5-4? I mean, how are we gonna mark these, I guess is my question. We need to, Bill, don't we need to mark these in a certain way, since we have Hicks with numbers and letters, we have O'Brien with numbers, right? I mean, it says in the rules what they're supposed to be.
Correct.
So how are we gonna address the numbered letters, the numbers sequentially that should have been letters?
Well, first off, are you only using the quote newer?
no, we use both, but I just point out, it also says in your rules that you can't have a hearing on a motion unless it was served 7 days before the hearing. So I don't, with respect to Mr. Hartman, who I'm not a fan of, he brings up that the rules are very selectively applied. So
That's not my question. My question is procedural. So I just pointed out that they should have been letters. You know that, obviously, or you wouldn't have done it here. But I'm not trying to give you a shot. I'm trying to, for commission members, to be able to understand, since we have a claimant and a respondent where we have numbered exhibits, and that we don't get confused.
I did letter this time merely to create a
No,
separation.
I understand that. My question to the chair and Mr. Richter is how are we gonna deal with the current lettered exhibits, they're numbered exhibits?
Right. the
So we don't
previously used
confuse them
numbered
with Mr.
exhibits.
O'Brien's exhibits, that's my,
Well, since we have A through M, then A through M is in this packet, correct?
Yes.
Okay. As you go about referring to a previous, let's start with N, and change it from the number
so
to.
one, yeah, or you
That
would just
letter.
you would do one would be N, you could just sequentially do it. Couldn't we
Just
just,
for ease of commission member reference.
I'll do whatever you tell me, but it might be more confusing that we're going to have another numbering scheme. I
I
think.
could just call it complainants 1, 2, 3,
Yeah, what I've
4,
seen in the
5.
past is complainants exhibit versus respondents exhibit, is to separate complainants exhibit 1 versus respondents exhibit 1. And that's how it's typically been put into your stuff after the fact, and there's never been a rigorous following of the lettering versus numbering. Frankly, I just saw the letter versus number thing. When I did this, I figured out, should I pick up with the last number?
it's.
Or should I, and I just
it's
purely did the letters, not because, because I thought it would create a clear separation, because I knew you'd have 2 packets, the ones with letters versus the ones with numbers.
So whatever the chair, I'm fine with that. If we do complaint in one. that's
Yes,
fine.
I think if we could just refer to it as complaint 1, complaint 2, respondent 1, respondent. But I do appreciate the effort to make sure there's no confusion. Thank you. Okay, so that's how we'll move forward.
And then, I don't know if it's appropriate before I start questioning Ms. Schmidt, but just, I asked for 8 subpoenas to be issued in regards to this. One person claims that the sheriff in Franklin County says they were served, says they weren't served. Several people were served residential service versus personal service. So there's been subpoena issues. Her husband did not accept the subpoena. So I just want to put that on the record. And if at some point we need to talk about, or there's any issues with my concerns about witnesses not being served subpoenas that then impair my case, I wish to do that, because Mr. Goldstein, for example, is one of the people who said he was never served anything. But the records show that there was residential service at his office, but he subsequently said he never received any subpoena. And the treasurer of the campaign, Mr. Schmidt, didn't accept the subpoena. And so there's some issues with witnesses. So we have Mr. Schmidt and 4 other witnesses today. There's 4 other ones that, are in the lurch that were not properly served.
Julie,
And I might clarify the record if I could, Madam Chair. Mr. Schmidt was not served. And I think that's the fact. Whether or not he didn't accept service would suggest that he was approached, sought to be served, and if he's not home when the sheriff's office knocks on the door and there's no answer, he's not, quote, refusing service, he just hasn't been served.
That's been noted in the record as well.
Thank you.
We're ready. So Mr. Schmidt, I have 7 things I wanted to just follow up on. Our wrap up from the last testimony. And then as we go, I might make reference to things that you said, and if necessary, I'm prepared. I have there a speaker and a video and so forth that we can play back if there's any question. If you feel like I in any way misrepresent something you said in your prior sworn testimony. You talked about, in your prior sworn testimony, you talked about that you did a significant amount of door knocking yourself. Is that a correct statement? You did a lot of door knocking yourself. How did you determine the routes to door knock, and was anybody else consulted on the routes that you were using to door knock?
I started with my township. When I finished my township, I went to Union Township, and my sister helped me with the various other townships.
So the question I asked was, did you coordinate with anybody else to determine kind of where to go? What, just typically if you run a campaign and you're door knocking, I need to make sure that you don't door knock the same neighborhood I door knock. So you need to compare notes with other people that might be door knocking, like you and your sister, for example.
Yes.
You're not going to go knock the same doors. Other than you and your sister, did you talk to anybody else about door knocking? Or routes for door knocking is really my question. About routes for door walking?
When we had other volunteers that showed up, then yes, we decided where they were going to go. But I did almost all of the door knocking myself, and I said that in the last testimony.
Okay.
I worked every single day from sunup to sundown, door knocking on door after door after door. It has a history that I've had my entire life.
So you said other than when volunteers showed up, was there somebody, that kept a record of what neighborhoods had been door knocked and which ones had not?
I did.
Okay, anybody else?
I have no idea.
Okay, so you did all of your volunteer coordination on where they should go knock and so forth.
Specifically, no. Technically, yes.
Explain what that means. Specifically, no, technically, yes.
If people are going to come and door knock for you, you generally give them an area. Whatever area they covered, whether they knocked on those specific doors, how they knocked on those doors, I don't know. I didn't keep records of what other people may have done as a volunteer. I only kept my own records.
So I guess that didn't really address the question I don't think is that, so I'll get to the question, but let's say that I said I wanted to be a volunteer for you, and I live in Union Township, P1P, and K is right now, Union Township K is right next to me. Obviously, you can't tell if I said I was gonna go door knock for you, if I actually did or not. But if I volunteered and said, you know, I want to door knock for you, you know, typical campaign, you would have, you know, well, I'm gonna assign you to go knock here, and somebody would be keeping an integrated record of where has been knocked and where it hasn't. And so my question to you was, did you keep that integrated record, or did somebody else, or more than one person keep that integrated record on who had door knocked where, or who had at least been deployed to door knock where?
I don't know if the people that helped me kept records or not. If you said you were gonna go to your township, you said you were gonna go to the polo fields, I'd mark it off as done.
So just for the sake of the commission's understanding, Polo Fields is a multi-precinct neighborhood in the area of her district and where I live close by. So there's actually, I think, 2 or 3 precincts in Polo Fields.
Right.
It's a very big neighborhood. And so most politicians at a campaign think of precincts and who's walking which precinct. So I'm still a little unclear on when volunteers came forward, who was giving them direction on what neighborhoods to go knock, and keeping a record of whether those neighborhoods had already been knocked or not, or purported to be knocked or not.
There were weekends where people came and volunteered. We met in a parking lot. They went somewhere, I went somewhere else. I have no idea how many doors they knocked. I know the areas that they were supposed to knock, and because of the expanded area that I had to do and COVID coming in and stopping it, I'm not sure whether they completed their assignments or not. So no, I didn't follow up and say, hey, how many doors did you do? But yeah, there were deployments that came on weekends, usually on a Saturday, and I've been part of those deployments for other candidates. Where you get together, you meet in the parking lot, I go here, you go there, you go there.
I'm kind of confused because, and so I just want clarity. In politics, that's typically, you go to precinct P1P, you go to precinct K, you go to precinct J, not just these general, you go to Polo Fields, or you go to here. Were you the sole, or who was keeping track of what precincts have been knocked? And was there anybody other than you doing that?
I can't speak for the way Mr. Hicks does door knocking. I can only speak for the way that I do door knocking. I keep records of the doors that I knock on. I don't check up on volunteers and what they do.
Was Luke Householder a volunteer?
Was supposed to be.
What does that mean?
Luke was supposed to come and help me. I don't believe he ever did,
And what lead you to believe he did or didn't?
because I received a call saying he was not going to be door knocking.
And who was that call from?
Speaker Householder.
Do you believe that Luke Householder was door knocking in your district, our area where we live, for other candidates?
I can't speak to that.
Did you ever talk with Stephen Caraway about Luke Householder's role as a volunteer?
Can't remember.
Can't remember? Okay. What about R.J. Mancini? In your mind, was he a volunteer ever?
I don't think he ever door knocked for me.
Well, he won't be here today, but you know, he's always, you know, if he's indicated he did. So that's why I'm just asking you, like, if you had you saw him as a volunteer, or you saw him as nothing? You just said a second ago that you kept track of volunteers.
No, I did not keep track of volunteers. Volunteers were deployed. Can I tell you who they were? No.
Okay, so you had volunteers, but you didn't keep. So what did you do related to volunteers?
I gave them donuts. They had a sheet. They went home. Just as when I do it for other people, they give me donuts. They want me to do an app. I don't like the app. I finish where I'm supposed to go and I go home. And nobody checks up on me to say, did you finish? So it might be different for you, but it's not the way I do things.
Well, it might be similarities, so when you have the donuts, one of the things I've found is when you have the donuts, usually are having a rally point where the volunteers are showing up, you're giving them some donuts, then they're getting deployed. So
Correct.
somebody has to tell them to show up to get the donuts because we're having a knock fest on Saturday. That means that they don't just by osmosis show up in the Kroger parking lot. Oh, there just happen to be people walking by and they see donuts and they want to go door knocking. That's been my experience, okay? Somebody has to coordinate that, to put out the word, to contact people. When it's as you well know, if it's a sitting rep, or an endorsed candidate for staff of reps to come and have a Saturday door knock campaign. So that's,
Can we just kind of keep it to questions, please?
so who was the person or who instituted the actions that caused people to show up to get the donuts that then we're gonna be deployed to go do the knocking?
I can't answer that, I don't know.
So you don't know?
No,
So what do you think, how did you know where to set up the donuts then?
I can't remember who said, we're gonna do a deployment, at Eastgate Mall parking lot, show up at 10 o'clock. I don't know who called and asked me to do that. I don't remember.
Can you name any person that did that? Stephen Caraway, Tommy Rolfe, any
I have
person?
no idea, sir, I don't remember. It's been so long ago.
Did you or your sister do that?
Do what?
Create the rallies that come to the parking lot at the Eastgate Mall to get the donuts and then go deploy?
No,
So you guys never did that, so it was always somebody else did it?
I was, I don't know who would have called me, but somebody said, we're gonna meet at Eastgate parking lot and help you this weekend. Perfect, I'll be there.
Does that happen regularly? Just somebody that you, was not a tight associate like Stephen Caraway, just called you up and said, if you bring us some donuts at the Eastgate parking lot, we will be door knocking for you. Just show up, bring us the donuts and we'll be ready to go. And then you don't, people that you only have no relationship with or don't know, are not tied to somebody you've been tight with like Stephen Caraway.
I have done it for other people. I didn't really know the other people. I was called and asked, would you show up and help? And I have done that in the past, and I will do that in the future.
Okay. I'm gonna move on.
Thank you.
So your representation, and I read it during our hearing, was at 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 50 seconds at the last I'm glad to play. Now, I had prior conversations with Mr. Katz on how to do this long before my husband sent the email, which I believe was in January of 2022 that your husband sent the email. And I could read on here. So I want to ask you, because I was a little unclear looking at the prior testimony and reading watching it, not reading the transcript, is exactly, in your estimate, how many calls did you have with Mr. Katz prior to the email sent by your husband?
I don't know.
Well, you said last testimony, I was upset, we had multiple conversations, I did not believe they were on a mode, because I was asking about, was it on a mode or his office line? So what does multiple mean then?
More than one.
5 or more?
More than one.
So that would be 2,
More than one.
but you can't remember 2, 5, 10?
No. I'm being honest, I can't remember,
So then how can you remember it was more than 1 even?
because I know it was more than one.
Okay, and those were calls that you had with Mr. Katz
Yes.
versus your husband, Peter, had?
I had calls with Mr. Katz.
Okay, and when you had those calls with Mr. Katz, What did you represent to Mr. Katz that the invoice from David Goldstein was for?
My calls were how to address it in the campaign filing report.
What was it? I mean, if I were giving you advice, I'd get to know, when you say how to address it in the filing report, it'd be like, well, what is it? I need to know what it is to know how to address it.
It's a bill. How do it comes 18 months after the fact, or 16 months, or whatever it was, after the fact. Now you've got a back date. How do you backdate? How do you report this as a debt? How do you do things legally within the Secretary of State's office? Not should I report it, but how do I report this legally?
And you're saying you reported it consistent with the advice you received from Mr. Katz?
We reported it consistently with what we were told by the Secretary of State's office. Myself, with Mr. Katz, and we just reported our new report. You call the office to make sure you're doing it correctly. Do you do line A, do you line B, do you line C? They tell you that. They're not, it's just reporting things properly.
Was there somebody, the way you answered that and then pulled back, makes me wonder, was there somebody in addition to Mr. Katz that you talked to in the Secretary of State's office about that matter?
Could have been, don't remember.
Don't remember?
No.
So it's a yes, no, or maybe?
I don't remember, it's been so long ago. I know, you asked me specifically if I had ever talked to Mr. Katz. Yes.
Do you have generally memory issues?
No.
Okay, so I think I would remember if I talked to a second person about it, especially when you had lots of time to recollect the memories with your husband and so forth, and to sit there and say, I don't remember, I may have, I may not have. I just am wondering if that seems a little odd testimony.
I'm going to object to move to strike. That was a comment by him, unrelated, a question, and it was related to his memory issues, if he has any. I think we ought to try and ask questions about the Goldstein invoice, how it was processed, how it was paid, how it was reported. So if I could have a continuing objection, I appreciate it.
Agreed, yeah, please move on.
Okay, so that means sustain.
Sustain.
The move on part is, okay, so, but to the question that it was relevant to is that you're under oath testimony if you can't remember whether you talked to a person other than Mr. Katz about the same transaction. The reporting of the transaction.
I can't remember. I can't remember, being honest. I don't know. Can't remember.
Okay, did the to be clear in this question, the matter before us is the failure to report compensated in-kind contributions. The only relevance to the David Goldstein invoice was somehow those compensated in-kind contributions reflected in some way in that invoice, which I'm sure is going to be part of their argument. That's why, but the Goldstein invoice or payment is not the issue of this case. So Ms. Schmidt, on the, you
Object to
reported
move to
that
strike the
invoice.
statement before the question, Mr.
Well, then I move to strike your commentary on the Goldstein invoice. Because you made commentary in response to my question, we need to get on with questions about the Goldstein invoice. I'm only asking about the Goldstein invoice because it's my belief that you're going to try to make a case that that was somehow plussed up to record professional services.
Well, it's dangerous to try and read people's minds, Mr. Hicks, in asking questions of Ms. Schmidt, so I would ask him to ask questions on the subject, not what I might do or might say in the future.
Please ask questions.
Well, then I'd ask the chair that also Mr. O'Brien should not be making commentary while he's making an objection.
please, just ask questions, let's move this along, let's get to some evidence.
Like the commentary you just made about evidence, we're evidence.
Thank you.
Witnesses are evidence.
Right.
So you reported that transaction as David Goldstein. The invoice for it, you know, if I look at what I'd ask you to look at is Exhibit A, which, by the way, Mr. O'Brien, if you can help some, right next to Mr. Schmidt is a stack of all my exhibits for witnesses. And these are the prior ones. Here are the current ones. So I'm looking at Exhibit A. So in the second page of Exhibit A is the actual invoice that was disputed. And it is from Constant Content. Would you agree it's from Constant Content Company?
Yes,
So the collection agent was David Goldstein, correct?
yes.
So why wasn't the invoice reported on your financial reporting as an invoice from Constant Content?
We had to make the check out to David Goldstein, and in making the check out to David Goldstein, we had to report it as David Goldstein.
Was that the advice of Mr. Capps?
I can't remember.
So that particular invoice, which is the second page of Exhibit A, is for $39,122.
Yes,
Could you walk through each of those line items and tell me what you believe those were invoices for, that invoice was for?
services. Description. Additional universe. Service,
I'm not asking you to read them, I'm just saying, I'm asking you to say, you know, describe in layman's term what each of those line items was for.
I'm not sure, which is why we questioned it to begin with.
Do any of the line items on there, do you know what they were for?
No. Which
Do you-
is why we questioned it to begin with.
So do you have any idea when something, I'll use just the first line item, it says 20-OH-SCH-001P, and there's another one, what that nomenclature meant?
No idea.
So, bear with me. I'm trying to identify an exhibit I want to look at. Okay, so. I'm trying to find it, the exhibit. So there was an exhibit showing the invoice that you paid in the $164,000. And I'm just trying to locate that, where that one is, because it has similar nomenclature on it. So an invoice that you paid that you didn't dispute has similar nomenclature on the face of the invoice. I'm just trying to find which document it is. Maybe it was. But your testimony is you don't recognize that
No,
nomenclature.
I don't.
I know it's in one of these. something, I'll try to find it, but if I told you,
It's in your exhibit C, second page, page 6 of documents today.
no, I'm talking about the prior invoice. So if you remember in this matter, there was an invoice that was paid for $164,000. It was also from Constant Content. And then this came up afterwards as an unpaid portion of services. That prior invoice, which I apologize to the commissioners, I'm having trouble locating which exhibit it is. That prior invoice is in one of these exhibits, and it had similar nomenclature. So I wanted to, for describing things, so I can come back to that, or on redirect, come back to.
Exhibit 6 has the check, and Exhibit 4, I believe, is the official.
Exhibit 4, my original ones. Thank you, if I can find it. Four in my original. So. That's actually, that's not the same one. So that's before it got built to, that relates to the Goldstein invoice. So Exhibit 4 is a strategy and media. Is that the one you're looking at? The strategy and media invoice? There's another Constant Content invoice, that's the one that was for, I'll come back to it, I'll find it, come back to it.
I have here the one far of mine.
The long one, the one that's for the 164,000?
Yes.
What, was that one of your exhibits? Mr.
Exhibit
Howard?
11.
Okay, so that's why we're, yeah, and that's one of your past exhibits or one of your new exhibits?
It's a new exhibit.
Okay.
Number 11.
Thank you, I know I saw that somewhere. Okay. So then I'll direct you, and if the witness has a copy of your exhibit, so this is, if I say it right, Respondents Exhibit 11. Respondents Exhibit 11. So this is a different, this is an invoice that you would acknowledge that you paid, recognized and paid.
Yes,
Originally, okay, your original campaign or in one of those
Yes.
reports along the way. And so, so there's, the use of the nomenclature SCH-002 is similar, but a lot of it's dissimilar, like where it says photo shoot and things like that. It's very different than the other invoice. Do you recognize the nomenclature on this invoice?
which nomenclature?
Like what is 2-11 A drop 2018? I'm down on the fourth line, like what that means. What were you paying for?
To be honest, I don't know. Part of the campaign.
But you did not object to this invoice in any form? Did you object to this invoice in any form?
No,
Do you think your husband knows what each of those line items was?
no.
So why would you, excuse me, but why would you get one invoice from Constant Content and pay it without objection and not knowing what the line items are, but then get another invoice from Constant Content and not pay it and say it because you don't know what the line items are? Why wouldn't you protest this invoice?
Because that came at a timely, that came during the campaign. The Goldstein invoice came long after the campaign was gone. It was over. Suddenly, over a year later, you get a bill from a collection company. Wouldn't you question it?
So when did you, I'm looking at this, another exhibit I'm looking for. When did you recognize and pay that $164,000 invoice?
When did I pay it?
When did you recognize that obligation? On what campaign finance report?
When we received it in the mail, we recognized it as an
That's-
obligation.
My question was on what campaign finance report did you
I
recognize that
don't
obligation?
know, whatever one we filed it under.
So it looks. So the check, the $100,000 check was dated April 2, 2020,
Yes,
and that's in Exhibit 6. Complainant Exhibit 6 from the first round. So you received that invoice on or about about March 18th, and then you pretty promptly paid $100,000 towards it, and then you showed the rest of it as debt at that time,
Yes,
$64,000. So that means that more money was spent than you had on hand in your campaign, and therefore, when you got this bill, you didn't have enough money to pay it, and had to show part of it as a debt. Is that a correct analysis of how it was reported?
yes,
So was this, but all of this was authorized by your campaign?
yes,
But you don't know what these line items are?
not exactly that.
In your campaigns, I have very limited experience. But most candidates and campaigns are very worried about much more money getting spent than they actually have in their campaign coffers to pay. So you had a situation where, you got a bill and paid it, and were short at the time, $64,000, and then had to show it as a debt, and then later paid it, pretty promptly, but later paid it. Was it unexpected?
Yes,
Why was it unexpected? If it was authorized, why was it unexpected?
I was very concerned with what we were spending. And so I would ask questions, how much is it costing? I only have this much in my campaign. When I got the bill, I didn't have enough. We quickly paid it as much as we had. And then I wrote a personal check to pay half of the rest of the balance, in addition to having another fundraiser to pay for the rest of it. And that's not abnormal in campaigns.
I think, you represented that you were very concerned with the amount of, I don't want to misstate anything you just said. You were concerned with the amount of money being spent, you were keeping track of it, and then you end up getting a bill you said you authorized everything, but it's much more than you had on hand. And I don't have $64,000 sitting around, if somebody suddenly sent me a bill that was way more than I expected.
But it has to be a question.
It's gonna be a question,
Okay.
okay? So you then authorized expenses in excess of what you had on hand?
I can't comment to that question in that format of a yes or a no. I authorized for expenses, but I didn't know what the amount was going to be. I don't think you can quantify what the amount is going to be. I knew I had an obligation to pay it, and I paid it.
So I've not been
But the
involved.
question is, did I pay the bill? I paid the bill.
Now, the question is that you said that the Goldstein invoice, you disputed and was not, but this invoice also had an amount that was much more than you expected. But then you said you authorized everything. So my question is, was it generally a very loose and sloppy financial management of the campaign?
No,
But you were stunned by surprise, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, by the amount. Okay. If I made the assertion to you, Ms. Schmidt, that the difference, one of the key differences between the first and second invoice is the first invoice is predominantly dealing with television and media work, and the second one is predominantly dealing with mailers and postcards, would you agree or disagree with that assertion?
I can't comment.
Well, you can look at the invoice.
What, Mr. Hicks, the question is, I paid the bill, I paid the bill. The second bill comes in a year plus later.
So my
Why
question,
wouldn't I question that bill?
but my question wasn't that. My question was, would you agree that the first invoice was predominantly media activity, and the second invoice appears to be predominantly mailer and postcard activity? Not exclusively, not entirely, but one is predominantly media, television, cable buy, and the other one is predominantly mailers and postcards. Not exclusively, because there's some postcards on here. Would you agree with that assertion, or say you or not?
I don't agree with the assertion, I can't comment on that.
So the first invoice, what did you think it was for then generally? Media, postcards, didn't know?
Everything.
Everything. And what was that? What was everything?
Media, mailers, production, etc.
How many mailers did you do during your campaign?
I know of, I don't know.
More than 5? Less than 5?
I don't remember. I don't know.
You don't even know generally? I'm not asking you like exactly 6, exactly 7. I'm just asking generally. More than 5, less than 5, 1?
Around 5. I don't know.
Well, I don't want you to just make up a number
Well,
because I
you're
said
wanting me to
5.
make up a number. More than 1.
More than 1 mailer.
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever talk to Steve? Well, in your prior testimony, you stated that you never, and you can play back, if you're, that you did not talk to Stephen Caraway about, for example, whether he was properly reported as an in-kind compensated, you said at the time, and I could read it, and I could play it, you said at the time that you didn't talk to him about that, instead you hired an attorney, and that's what your course was. Since it was a complaint, you hired an attorney, and you did not talk.
I hired an attorney for what?
Because there was a complaint here, I asked the question in a prior testimony, did you ever talk to Stephen Caraway about whether he had been properly reported, was he compensated, was he properly reported? And your answer at the time, and I can read it back and I can play it back, was, I'm not quoting it right now, but I can if we want, to the effect of, no, I never talked to Stephen Caraway, but I instead hired an attorney, because since it was a complaint, you wanted an attorney to handle it. I'm not judging that, I'm just replaying that, because my ultimate question to it here is, I'm telling you what your prior testimony was, but would you say that you never talked to Stephen Caraway about whether he had been compensated and whether he had been properly reflected on a campaign finance report?
Objection, it's not directed to a particular point in time. She may well talk to you today about it, and that will be covered by your question, Mr. Hicks. So I asked you to limit it, or the chair to limit it to at what point in time the conversation either happened or allegedly happened, or didn't happen.
Sustain, can you
Okay,
clarify?
so again, I'll ask the question the same way, and we'll see if you want to sustain it. At any point in time, okay, did you talk to Stephen Caraway or ask Stephen Caraway about whether he had been compensated working for your campaign and properly reflected in any report? At any point in time, including, I guess, today.
Including today? I didn't specifically ask the question. My attorney did.
So the answer is that at no point in time did you ask him.
I don't believe I did ever, no.
Okay, so at no point in time did you ask, I just want to get that, at no point in time ever, including today, did you talk to Mr. Caraway about?
I don't remember ever talking to him about being compensated.
Okay. You mentioned casually, last time you testified, you made some like offhand remark during your testimony that maybe the newer Goldstein invoice, the second one where it was for 39 and you paid 20, that invoice, that maybe it had been plussed up in some way. What did you mean by plussed up?
Not, campaigns normally plus up their product, whether it's media, whether it's production, whether it's mailers, to cover the overall cost of their service to you. It's no different than if you go in for an oil change at Valvoline. You don't just pay for the oil, you pay for the service surrounding the oil. And just as I just went to Valvoline the other day to get my car refilled, it didn't say how much the plus up was for the technicians that put the oil in. It just said it was a $50 plus bill, which I paid. Oil change, $50 or what, plus tax. That's normal in campaigns.
So, do you associate the term plus up with profit margin? Could you
Probably.
describe Valvoline Oil, and that would be called a profit margin? They have a profit margin built into the product or service they offer.
Plus up profit margin would be similar.
So I just want to get at, there's a difference between a vendor like a printer, and I'll get to the question, who has a profit margin built into their printing services versus somebody, you know, when I heard you say plus up, I interpreted it as like, well, I'm going to take some other unrelated expense and somehow bury it in this invoice. When you said plus up, were you referring to a belief that there was a expense other than the vendor's, you know, profit margin that somehow had been incorporated into that invoice?
I can't answer that. I know a vendor approached me years ago and had asked how they did mailers. How much is it gonna cost? And when you compared the cost to somebody else, he used the term plussing them up a penny a page. That was years ago. So I've always used the term plussed up because that's what I was told.
So that wasn't my question. Now, my question was,
I can't answer it. I don't understand how to answer it properly, so I can't answer it.
well, let me ask it again, or I can change the language so that you can better understand the question. You're the one that made to use the term plus, maybe it was plussed up or something very close to that effect. And I asked, you know, and then we get delineated profit margin versus plussed up. And I just asked, do you feel like there was a profit margin in it, or that there was some other unrelated expense that had been embedded within that invoice?
I wouldn't know.
Did you ask, or did anybody ask?
No, I didn't ask.
So I want to direct you in the commission to look at Complainant Exhibit C. And we're going to look at, and then if you, Mr. Schmidt, like I said, these are, I want to, if you can put these back, because I might need to use them again. So, but this one's right behind here, A is, in case that comes up again with your C. So, this invoice, that's the Complainant Exhibit C. By the way, in reflective of this, I did put complainant down at the bottom, because I thought it was like complainant, you know, page 6, okay, because I put the page numbers on these this time. So that invoice is the one that you paid, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that invoice, if I go look, and it's right behind you on the desk there, Exhibit A, and you guys in the commission can flip between them. Exhibit A is the $39,122 invoice,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was, and Exhibit B is $20,260, but Exhibit B is not, for example, not 60% off everything, or put a reduction at the bottom of the invoice. Exhibit C is one line item off of the original invoice. Was that an admission that that line item was valid, but the other line items were not?
No. I can't say that it was an admission that it was correct. When I asked, please verify what this is, we could never, Mr. Goldstein couldn't verify it. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And finally they said, what about this amount? And I said, well, it was for a couple, I don't even know what it was for. It's been so long ago. But I would like to point out to the matter, the question that you asked, why did I make the check payable to David Goldstein? Because it says make the check payable to Mr. David Goldstein.
So,
You asked prior, why did I make the check out to Mr. Goldstein? And it said because to make it out to Mr. Goldstein. We agreed on the amount. I wanted to get the issue resolved. I also said to the gentleman, if you can find other proof, I will pay for whatever other proof you can offer.
why did you pay for that particular line
I
item?
can't remember whatever, it was up, we talked on the phone, I can't remember why we agreed to it. We agreed to it.
When you agreed to it, who was on the call?
Mr. Goldstein,
And who else?
nobody else.
Well, there has to, you can't have a call with only one person on the call. So you were on the
You
call.
can.
Right, no, you have more than one person on the call. So
Who
when I
was the other
said,
person?
you. So who was on the call? I was and Mr. Goldstein was,
I
okay?
just said that.
Was Peter Schmidt on the call?
No,
Was Peter Schmidt a participant in any calls with David Goldstein?
I wouldn't know.
Is-
I don't
is-
think he was.
Is Peter Schmidt your husband?
Yes,
Is he your campaign treasurer?
yes.
So when this invoice came up, you handled it exclusively and your husband, the treasurer, was not involved in any discussions about the invoice? Involving Mr. Goldstein, you two, I'm not asking whether you two talked about it.
I don't believe he was.
Why not? I'm just asking you why not, because it would seem normal to me that your treasurer would be involved in calls about a disputed invoice.
All my husband does is pay the bills.
Does he create and submit your financial reports, or do you do that?
Absolutely.
So he does more than just pay the bills?
He does the financial report. I
Okay.
hand him a bill, he inputs the bill, he does the financial report.
So, Ron, do they have your exhibits, your new ones from today?
Not that I know of. I gave them to Mr. Richter. I didn't think it appropriate for me to submit them directly to commission members.
Well, I didn't, I handed them out, I guess, but I just was wanting not to have them, okay? Because one of your things, I don't know that they need them for this, is that there's an envelope of the certified letter for request for when you've got the bill, for the second
Yes.
bill. And it looks to me like it says August 8th, 2021. And maybe
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien could confirm, that's the date, August 8th,
I
2021.
would, yes,
And then the agreement to pay that was January 27th, 2022.
absolutely.
So during that course of time, so that's August, September? So that's almost 6 months,
Yes,
okay? And during that course, how many calls would you estimate you did with Mr. Goldstein?
as soon as we got the bill, I got the bill, I shouldn't say Peter, I got the bill.
And
Within a few days, I called David Goldstein, no reply.
Mr. Hood, if you don't mind while you're looking for that, we have a commissioner that requested a brief.
oh, that's fine.
Is that all right?
Yeah,
with you?
yeah, absolutely.
Is that all right with you? I'm going to take a brief, like, how long do we need? 10 minutes? 10 minutes. So so it's 2:15, so if we can be back.
2:30.
2:30.
Yeah, I mean.
Go
I
nurse.
know if I'm.
Okay, it's 2:37, and we're gonna call the meeting back into order so that we can, get moving on these things. So we're back in session. Thank you.
So per Mr. O'Brien's statement, you guys might not have this, but the date on the envelope is 3rd of August 2021
Correct.
for that other invoice. Okay. So I want to direct the commission to complainants exhibit number 5. Complainants exhibit number 5. I'm only going to make a very tangential reference to it, so that if you don't see it, I don't think it matters. And I would encourage Ms. Schmidt, I'm going to keep these organized, but to have a copy of complainants exhibit number 5. Which is, that's when we keep these organized. So complainants exhibit number 5 is here. So if you would flip to not the last page of that, but does that have page numbers on the bottom of it, Ms. Smith? Like in bluish color?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think it would be page 25, which is the signature page.
Yes.
Complainant exhibit number 5, which is the original complaint that I filed. Complainant's exhibit number 5. And the, so what's the date on there as to when this was notarized?
Madam Chair, if I may, I'm not following this.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, Mr. Hicks, where you are.
Exhibit 5 I have is
Is a,
from Tommy
this
Rawl.
is an email from Tommy Rawl that we signed.
That's on exhibit.
You're looking at the sub-exhibits, so there's, within the exhibits, there were exhibits, so complainant, so you're looking at an exhibit within an exhibit?
Are you on the?
So the one
numbers?
on, the one
Mr.
that's
Hicks, are you on the numbers or the letters?
the numbers,
I don't have the numbers.
That was my point about.
yeah, it's from the last hearing, it's from the hearing of, it's from the last, it should have from the past hearing.
I have,
They're in your book, or whatever she said.
but I'm still not where you're at, so.
So let's get there.
Yeah, it's in the book, it's not,
And because of the confusion that it could have, I put hearing document below the 5 on this one, so it wouldn't be confused with sub-exhibits within exhibits that have numbers on them. Yes, we really need a third method, like numbers, Roman numerals, whatever, so that you could, smiley emojis. But I put, so complainant exhibit number 5, I put the word hearing document below it in blue, just to differentiate it from some of these heavy exhibits. Okay, so, and then it should, the set that I gave out, not the ones that Mr. Richter had page numbers, but, so it would be, it was my page 25, what I handed out, but page 2, but, Mr., how do you say, Quilty? Held it up, it's the one with the signature on it. See my signature. Okay, so he's in the right place. Everybody in the right place.
I think so, thank you.
Okay, so, all right. Ms. Schmidt, are you in the right place?
I'm just trying to clarify what you've got here, so.
Yep, I think she has the right one.
Yeah, those, the ones I handed her were all stapled separately, and I handed her just the right exhibit. Okay? And I think even yours is single-sided, not double-sided. So, at the bottom of that, if you're on the right page, Ms. Schmidt, and we'll know by your answer to this question, I guess, is, what's the date of the notary of this?
June 8th, 2021.
Okay, if I told you that I, on that date, mailed copies of this, emailed copies of this to both you and your husband, because we deal with each other in the political system, would you have any reason to dispute that?
I've blocked you, so I wouldn't have gotten it.
So, okay, so your assertion is that back on June 8th, 2021, at that point in time, you had blocked me and not received any emails from me since, at least as of that date. I don't know if that was the date you blocked me, but forward from there, you've never received or replied to an email Because if you reply to an email, it would be confusing that you had blocked me.
I have blocked you, I don't know when I blocked you. I don't remember getting this, but.
You don't remember getting the complaint? This is the complaint that got filed with the Ohio Election Commission that
Oh,
we're
well,
here.
that-
Your
I thought
question
that-
dealt with you emailed it to her, not
Yeah.
whether she got the complaint sent by
I
Mr.
got the
Rick.
complaint, yes.
Okay. So, okay, so that, and then you wouldn't know whether your husband, your contention is that you wouldn't have received it because you had blocked me. Do you believe your husband's blocked me also?
I have no idea.
So, okay. Can I,
At least,
Wait for a question.
and I don't know the appropriate way, so I can be objective to whatever, but I would be interested in when was this exactly served? Because, you know, I say I emailed it to her at the time I sent it in, but then you would have actually served it, Mr. Richter? And what date was it served?
All the stuff I brought up here,
It's everything but that.
yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing our notices, at least at a quick glance. So I don't know the answer to that.
Is it on there? He's pointing at something. So I saw over my shoulder, yeah, on June 16th, 2021, it's Respondents Exhibit 1.
Oh, well, that's when we would have sent it out.
Respondents
yes.
Exhibit 1, it was sent out on June 16th, 2021. And those are normally sent by certified mail?
Certified
correct, Mr.
mail,
Ricker?
so, yeah.
So there would be a record that you would have of when exactly it was delivered.
I remember the one from you, yes.
So that's, okay, so I'm just trying to establish when you became aware of the complaint. I brought up that I had emailed it to you, you said you didn't get it from that. We brought up that Mr. Richter would have sent it by a certified mail on June 16th. Okay? And then there'll be a record somewhere that Mr. Richter could probably figure out when exactly was it received according to the post office.
Yeah, we've got a green card somewhere, but it's obviously not something that I brought up today.
So I would say normally having received many of your,
Having received it?
I'm not
She's not
disputing
disputing
having
having
received
no, I'm establishing when she received it. Because remember, we just established that on August 3rd is when they got the invoice from Goldstein. And so we know that Mr. Ricker mailed it on June 16th. I don't want to say any wrong date. There was some point after that it was received. You know, probably, I would posit before August 3rd. So my question, ultimately establishing a timeline for receipt of the complaint is, well, let me kind of keep this more straightforward, and I apologize for. So, in that complaint that you ultimately received, which is that exhibit in your hand, Exhibit 5, what does that, we can look at it in detail, or you can comment on it, but what would you say it alleges?
You're alleging I improperly paid my bill,
No.
okay?
What would be the text in here that would make you say that it alleges you improperly paid a bill?
Failed to account to the support of the Ohio Republican Central and Executive Committee, the state candidate fund, failed to report costs of Rolf Caraway and Luke Householder in a pre-primary filing. May have failed to account for the cost of Rolf Caraway and Luke Householder in any filing, and then failure to complete an accurate statement.
Okay, so what part of that was paid a bill improperly?
I misspoke. Failed, you're stating that I didn't do things properly.
No, I think, well, what is my, so Just because we seem to be confused on what I even alleged, and I want to make sure that you and the commission are aware of what I alleged. You see on page 2, where I signed it down below, where it says, "It is clear." You see that part? So if you read right out to that, the 2 bullets, can you read those?
It is clear that Ms. Schmidt and/or Schmidt for Ohio failed to account for the support of the Ohio Republican State Central and Executive Committee State Candidate Fund as an in-kind contribution in any filing. This may have been intentional since she was not endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party State Central Committee and should not have been receiving such support.
Now, the next bullet.
Document speaks for itself. Someone would object to have the witness sit here and read the document.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we're getting out of this.
This is the case, isn't it?
Well, just a second ago, what we're getting at, Mr. Richter, is just a second ago, this false characterization that my complaint had something to do with paying a bill improperly. That's not my complaint whatsoever.
I misspoke. Move on.
So now that you've thought about it, what would you say I was alleging? In layman's terms, in your terms, Ms. Schmidt, what did I
You are
allege?
alleging in layman's terms that I improperly you're saying that I don't know what you're alleging. I don't want to go on record and argue and you're alleging what is stated here.
So at this point, this kind of response, I question like your competency, because if you can't even state what you think I'm alleging.
Judge can move to strike, Your Honor.
Was the previous objection sustained?
Yeah, sustained, so, I mean, the complaint does speak for itself. I'm not sure what you're trying to get at here.
Well, I'm trying to get at that, and I'm not doing a proper legal objection right now, but I object to the constant mischaracterizations of what I actually alleged. She
But I don't know how
characterized that
relevant-
I alleged the payment of a bill improperly. That's not at all what I alleged, not even remotely what I alleged. And I'm object to this kind of constant characterization of that what we have before us has to do with a bill. It doesn't have to do with a bill at all. The only reason we're pursuing a bill is because of an assertion potentially that that bill somehow covered these unreported expenses. And so the fact that I asked Ms. Schmidt, a seated state rep, what am I even alleging, and she can't answer, does make me wonder about her competence.
With all due respect, okay, you're welcome to have that opinion, but I don't know that really gets us more evidence toward a violation than you're alleging here. So let's move on toward producing evidence.
So somewhere around, have you figured out, Mr. Richter, when she would have received that?
No, I just did find the notice, and there's no green card attached to it, so we didn't get a green card back from the Postal Service.
Okay.
And I saw the one that was sent to you, and it had a June 18th date.
Okay, it's I'm used to getting lots of things with postcards on them from you.
Probably before the beginning of July 2020.
Okay, so we've already established that the first contact on the second invoice from Constant Content was the envelope was dated August 3rd. Okay?
Yes.
So you probably, unless some really screw up happened, were aware of this about the same time I would have been aware when I received it. What'd you say, Mr. Ricker, June 18th or something? Okay, 2 days later on June 18th. You alleged that, you stated that you had many conversations with Mr. Goldstein about the invoice. In all of that, all those conversations over a 6-month period, did you, in light of that you had got a complaint about not reporting these expenses, did you ever ask him if this invoice in any way incorporates cost for Luke Householder, Tommy Rolfe, R.J. Mancini, or any of those people?
No.
Why wouldn't you?
Because I didn't know what the invoice was for. I received an invoice almost a year and a half after the election was over. I wasn't going to pay it until I was assured it was correct.
But at the time, you had been served a complaint from the Election Commission alleging that you had not reported certain compensated professional services as in kind. Then you get an invoice. Why would you not have the due diligence to ask if there's a nexus between a complaint saying I didn't report expenses and an invoice that I get a year and a half after?
The two are not related.
How do you know that if you didn't ask?
Why would I have asked about this on a bill that I got from a collection agency?
Well, the bill you got was from Constant Content, right? And it was being collected on behalf of, by a collection agency,
I
correct?
received the bill from a collection agency.
When you got the notice from Mr. Goldstein, did you ever go talk to anybody in Constant Content? Since the
There
invoice
was
was...
nobody to call. It was a defunct organization at that point.
So, okay. So you didn't have any access to Megan Fitzmartin,
No,
Stephen Caraway?
well, I had access to Stephen Caraway, but I didn't ask about this or about Goldstein.
Do you think, so you get a complaint from the Election Commission saying that you didn't report certain expenses properly, then you get an invoice. Do you believe it's reasonable that you would not have even asked the person bringing the invoice to you whether that invoice might be for the very services that you're facing a Election Commission complaint over for having not reported?
No. There's no connection between the two.
So, okay, so I want to be clear. You're saying there's no connection whatsoever between the things I alleged and that invoice, and that's why you never asked.
I got an invoice from something that happened almost a year and a half before. I had no idea what that was for. It was a collection agency.
But you said you had calls over 6 months,
I only
back and
spoke.
forth.
No. I called Mr. Goldstein several times. I believe I only had 2 conversations with him. One was at the beginning and one was at the end because I wanted to put an end to that bill and get it resolved.
Okay, but you just said a second ago, and I don't want to put any words in your mouth, so I'm going to make sure that you answer, that you didn't ask because there was no connection between that invoice and the allegations that I made that you had not reported expenses related to Stephen Caraway, Megan Fitzmartin, and R.J. Mancini, and potentially Luke Alsworth.
There was no connection. I wouldn't have thought to have asked it.
Okay, so your
Period.
statement is,
I would not have thought to have asked it.
so your testimony is that that invoice had no connection to the services provided by Stephen Caraway, R.J. Mancini, et cetera, the people that I alleged had not been reported.
I received a bill.
I'm not
I'm
asked
trying to
that the
answer
witness
this.
answer the question.
I can't answer your question because it's one of those questions that, when was the last time you beat your wife?
I think that the issue with my question is, if you answer it,
You have to put it, you can't put a, I think, in there.
so did or did not, the expenses on that invoice, did they or did they not relate to Stephen Caraway, R.J. Mancini, or any of the other people that were alleged in my complaint?
I have no way of knowing.
Well, you just testified a second ago that there was no connection.
For the record, I believe Mr. Hicks was asking me, did I think that there was a connection? And did I think that I would ask David Goldstein, what does this include? Does this include this? When I got this, I never thought there was a relationship between this and David Goldstein. They were 2 separate events. They were 2 separate events in my mind.
Do you think there's a relationship now?
No,
Okay, so I just want, so your testimony is there's no relationship between the, yes or no, your testimony is there's no relationship between the services provided by Stephen Caraway, the people that I allege in my complaint, RJ Mancini, and SM Boys.
Can't guarantee it because I didn't produce the David Goldstein thing, but I don't think there's a connection.
Okay. All right. So, I'm looking for an exhibit. And if you could put those back, I think I'm done with those, by the way. Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. Put those, just so I can keep them in a stack there in the right order. So I want to address, I want you to look at Exhibit K. Complainant's Exhibit K, which is the set from today. Which in the pack I gave you guys, I think it's page 38 at the bottom. So if you look at, the Exhibit K has, I think, 1, 2, 3 pages. If you look at page 3 of that, which has the black line on it, do you recognize that email?
I don't know. Yes,
Okay, and what is that email?
Mr. Katz, I am Peter Schmidt, treasurer for my wife, Jean Schmidt's campaign, Schmidtville, Ohio. She told me she.
I didn't ask you to read it, I should ask you what it was, like, what is
Okay.
it? Like, for example, it's a note from my husband to Brian Katz.
It was from Peter Schmidt, but it says Jean Schmidt on the top, but he signed it Peter Schmidt.
And the email address is, I think your husband's, not yours, right?
Yes,
Okay. And where have you seen that note before?
I don't remember seeing it, but I'm sure I did, I don't know.
So if I told you it was one of your exhibits in the last hearing?
Okay, so my husband produced it, and can I read it, because I think it makes sense to why he wrote it, because I just read it. Mr. Katz, I'm Peter Schmidt, treasurer for my wife, Jean Schmidt's campaign, Schmidtville, Ohio. She told me she spoke with you Saturday, 3/29/2022, regarding our disputed debt with David Goldstein and Constant Connect. We have settled the debt and will be reported on our 2022 pre-primary report. The invoice was dated 11/4/2020, but we never received anything until 8/6/2021. I've amended our 2020 post-general, 2020 annual, and 2021 semi-annual to reflect the debt. The debt is also listed on our 2021 annual report that I just filed. We want to be in compliance. Please let me know if there's anything else we need to do. I'm glad he did that.
Okay, so that's, so that note is dated, what's the date on that note?
January 31st.
Okay, and you received the email, the mail from Mr. Goldstein was on
August
second or third
or
or whatever,
whatever.
okay. And then if you look at the prior page, which is a note from Mr. Katz
Mm-hmm.
to your husband, What's the date on that note?
December 28th.
Okay, so that was prior to the other note, right? Sometimes I get confused.
Yeah, December 28th.
So that was like, that was what, a month, basically a month prior to the
Yes.
other note. And so, it's to your husband, would you agree with that?
Good afternoon, Mr. Schmidt. Thank you for contacting our office seeking guidance on how to report a disputed debt. As discussed and in light of the recent Ohio Elections Commission decision regarding the committee to elect Alan Freeman, our office cannot provide legal advice on how to report a disputed debt. Instead, we recommend you seek legal counsel for a legal determination.
Was that, it says as discussed, so assuming sometime proximate to that time frame, there was some verbal discussion. Were you part of that discussion?
Yes,
With your husband and Mr. Goldstein? I'm sorry, I said it wrong. With your husband and Mr. Katz?
Mr. Katz.
Okay. But that, to your memory, was the only call with Mr. Katz in which both you and your husband were on with him? You spoke to having calls with him yourself, without your husband. You might have even said that you only, but this is the only, were there other calls that were all three of you?
I made the calls to Mr. Katz. I don't think Peter was on the call with me. I
On
know
any
my
call?
hus- Okay. I don't remember him being on the call with me.
On any call? I don't know what the call is.
There were several calls that I made to Mr. Katz. One, I know of two that we actually talked. I was frustrated because we didn't know how to properly report the disputed debt.
But just to be clear, wouldn't this note imply that your husband had a discussion with Mr. Katz?
You'd have to ask Mr. Katz that. I can't answer that.
I would love to be able to ask Mr. Katz that. But I've been forbidden from being able to question Mr. Katz on who he had discussions with and what advice that he gave. But I'd love to do that. But I have to ask you, do you remember that call?
No.
Okay. I think it's the last thing that I have. So you claimed in your prior testimony so I'm gonna, and I'd be glad to play it back. I had to reboot my computer, but I can play this. At 2:52:12 in the last hearing, you said, Mr. Ricker said, well, this is referring to I'm not asking a question about her prior things, I'm asking a question about her response to a question. Well, I think it goes to, by the way, I'm reading off of Exhibit G, the complainant Exhibit G, where I transcribed part of this, but again, if anybody questions the transcription, I'm glad to play back the video. Mr. Richter says, well, I think it goes to, I guess, to the veracity of what the history is with campaign finance filing. So I think there is a certain relevance there. Can you explain why you can, who's directing this to Ms. Schmidt, can you explain why you can't go into any further on that? Is there some sort of an agreement that was entered into that keeps you from speaking about it any further? And your answer was yes. So I'm going to ask again, what is that agreement and who is it with?
Object, I think that was the subject
That
of
was
the
the
order,
that
Mr.
was-
Dixon.
I'm asking about the witness's credibility and giving honest answers to questions. I'm not asking about the event. I'm asking about did she lie under oath about an agreement that does not exist?
Object, to move to strike his comments,
Ask
please.
the question again.
What is the agreement? What is the agreement that prevented you from answering any further questions?
Again, objection.
I'm sustained. I mean, that's, regardless of how you try and walk around it, you're asking about the material or the subject of the eliminate motion, which has been approved.
but the eliminate motion says that the commission will be considering the testimony. In the words of the motion, it says the commission will consider the testimony that took place. So I'm just asking, I'm trying to establish, was that a lie? Was that a lie under oath, that there is a legal agreement? By the way, last time I checked, a witness lying under oath is something that is subject to my questioning.
That's a mischaracterization of the ruling. I would again renew my objection and ask Mr. Hicks be directed to move on.
Sustained, move on.
I want to have an objection about the general kangaroo nature of these proceedings. Where a witness potentially lies under oath, and that is off limits from questioning.
You're making an incredible assumption there, and an assertion that's not backed up by anything.
What the irony of this is, in my objection, is that had Ms. Schmidt just answered a few questions, we would have been long past that issue. Guy had like 3 questions on it. But instead we get this rope-a-dope thing that there's some secret legal agreement that I'm unaware of the Federal Election Commission ever doing. Ever. So, and I just asked a question that would get at the point of whether the witness lied under oath.
I'm going to move to strike all of Mr. Hicks's last comments for the last 30 seconds.
Mr. Hicks, sustained. Mr. Hicks, move on.
Okay. I have no further questions for this witness.
And at least pursuant to my conversation with Mr. Richter, whether I should proceed with examining Ms. Schmidt now or wait until my case, if it reaches my case, I'm going to defer asking her questions and permit Mr. Hicks to call the other witnesses who are here and been waiting since 10 a.m. And then I can call her either later today.
I object to the characterizations that the witnesses have been waiting since 10 a.m. As we know, we made an agreement for the witnesses to not have to wait. So I guess I'm going to object to these constant mischaracterizations, Mr. O'Brien.
The witnesses that were here at 10 a.m. and then all but one have left. Actually, Mr. Carey is still here, but okay.
Mr. Seacrest still there too.
Madam Chair, am I permitted to ask a question of the witness?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. At the end of this, you guys are allowed to ask the witness questions if he doesn't have any.
Yeah, I defer asking a direct examination.
Just
As
So
my
I'm going to sit down because in theory you guys ask questions now and then it comes back to me.
Thank you.
I just have one. And I totally get the mental separation of the two things. I would have done the same thing. But I may have misheard, but I thought I heard you say that, you know, when the bill came, that why would you pay it at a constant contact was defunct. So even with a broker involved, if the client no longer exists, why did you have to pay anything?
I'm an honest person, and if I owe something, I want to pay it, but I wanted to make sure that I had incurred the bill to pay it.
But the receiver of said payment, if the entity does not exist, is just the attorney who's the broker who get a percentage off the top. There should, I mean, if the company no longer exists, the debt should, I mean, it's basically a, in bankruptcy, it doesn't like exist unless it's going through a bankruptcy court of some sort. I mean, it should be off the books at that point.
I can't,
Fair.
I got a bill from a collection agency. I've never had a bill from a collection agency before. I mean, that threw me for a loop that somebody was questioning my credit. And I wanted to make sure that it was resolved and appropriately resolved and whether I had even incurred it. And it was hard to get the questions answered.
Fair enough, okay, thanks. Appreciate that.
Oh, not at this point. We've got two that are presumably present. We'll deal with them first.
Okay, I just didn't
questions for Ms. Schmidt from the commission?
Actually, I had one. This goes back to volunteers in walking, when you did your walking. I guess I was a little confused at this. So when you walk, you said you do your neighborhood, somebody else would do another neighborhood, and then got into the donut discussion and all that stuff. But did you just go to random houses? How did you know where to go?
I called the Clermont County Board of Elections and I got a walk list. And the walk list gives you street addresses. And I asked for Republicans only because it was a Republican primary. And I asked for, at the end, I asked for if they could sort it on super Republicans, but they couldn't do that. So I have a Republican on the list. And they break it down by streets. So it would say Ward's Bend, and then all the addresses on Ward's Bend, and then you circle them around, and I have my own little notations that I do, whether they're home, whether they're not home, whether they like me, whether they don't like me, or no response, and I note them on mine. I don't know how anybody else does it, but that's the way I do it. I do it all by hand. I don't like using apps.
Fair enough. I've used the apps, I agree with you. So you use a list, which is normal. So I'm assuming all volunteers would have had lists also.
Yes, and I don't know how they got their list, because I didn't provide it.
Okay. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Any other questions for the commissioners?
I have three direct questions based on the question of the commissioner. So, and I can stand up there, but, so, if your
If
contention,
you could, please, just because I think it makes it easier.
it's only one
for Ms.
question, so
Schmidt
hopefully
to
it'll be
see it.
quick, I'm not bringing anyone, okay? Not even my Mountain Dew. So, your contention is the list that you used for doing walking was something provided by the Clermont County Board of Elections.
Sure, you get it off the internet.
Okay, so you're saying the standard walk list off the internet that you and I have both seen that the Clermont County Board of Elections has, that has just like, you know, multi-columns and it has the houses with like little underlines to check off if you visit them, that's what you're talking about. You also, correct, yes or no? I guess you're supposed to say yes or no.
Yeah, that's what I use.
Okay, so, but you asked if those are downloadable on the internet without contacting anybody in the Board of Elections. That's a normal part of the site, but then you refer to trying to have them sorted for super Republicans. So how did you get them and what was the super Republican thing about it?
Now you have to get it off the list. Back when I was running for this campaign, I would call Becky Rudd at the Board of Elections, and she would send me the email of the list that I wanted. Now they will no longer do that, and you have to do it on their website. But at the time, I would call Becky Rudd, 732-7, I can't remember the rest of the number. I got a direct line because I was calling her a lot. And she would download she would give me the download that I would then go to my computer, download it, copy all the copies, staple them together, put it on my thing, and go door knock.
Is what you downloaded a PDF or a spreadsheet?
I don't know, I'm not technologically savvy.
But you said you sorted?
They sorted it. When I got it, it was sorted by streets and then numbers on streets. What I had hoped we could do is get to a super list where you can, anybody that's voted in the last 4 primaries, but our Board of Elections was not able to do that.
So would you agree, in my observation, would you agree that long before this race, the Clermont County Board of Elections had a standard page that had downloadable walk lists that were PDFs for every precinct in the county?
Yeah,
Okay, that's what you used?
whatever Becky sent me is what I used.
Well, that would be online. She wouldn't send it to you. She'd tell you to go to the website. I asked her before.
Oh,
She'd
yeah.
say, if you want that, she'd say, go to the website. It's right there.
I'm gonna object, it's improper redirect, this is redirect, you had one question and now we're
And I'm
learning about PDFs.
It's all around the same
Yeah,
topic.
I'm not, look, back in 2000 and, God, what was it, 1920? You could call the Board of Elections and they would give you the list. They now make you do it online. I still continue to use the list. I have to go online and do it.
Have you ever
Back then
had,
it was different.
have you ever had Mr. Caraway or anybody else help you to create a super Republican list as you describe it?
No,
So in your long history, you've only used the list that's either downloadable or provided by the Board of Elections?
for me, yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Okay, so if there are no further questions, Mr. O'Brien.
I would defer any questions, Ms. Schmidt, until we would get to our case if we get there.
Okay, thank you. So at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Hicks, if you'd like to call your next.
Rob, I said it wrong. How does that, Rob? Secor?
Secor.
Secor. I'm gonna try to say it right. Rob Secor.
You can step up here and then, Mr. Richard will swear you in.
Stand at this point, Mr. Seacard, do you swear that the testimony you're about to give the commission is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Please seat and be prepared to answer questions.
Behind you, in case I refer to exhibit, that's stacked right next to that speaker.
Oh, sure.
Move it here.
Yeah.
Anything I'm gonna refer to is gonna be the stack, and it's actually only gonna be in the back part of it, so I'm actually gonna. I think, well, let me just put them all here, but there's numbered and lettered.
Yeah.
But it should be quick, okay? So Mr. Secor, what was your role in the 2020 primary?
Ohio Republican Party Executive Director.
Okay, and then, and I don't mean to skip any questions or anything like that, because there's some members that might remember him testifying before, but there are a lot of new members, okay? So, but real quick, what did those duties entail? As fast as you can.
I oversaw the day-to-day operations of the party, including political director, communications director, finance department. So just kind of everything the Ohio Republican Party was involved with.
Okay, and was part of what you were involved with that there were a set of resources that were being compensated by the Ohio Republican Party to assist candidates in the field?
Yes.
Okay, and was one of those resources R.J. Mancini?
Yes.
Okay, and can you briefly describe what were the role of those resources? Mr. Mancini and probably others, but the general role. What did they do? What were they being paid for by the ORP?
RJ, along with, I want to say 7 or 8, I think we went through this last time, between 7 and 10 we hired between 7 and 10 campaign managers for the, whatever it was called at the time, the House Republican Organizational Committee. It has changed names many times, as I'm sure you're all aware, but, and their job was to manage campaigns for House candidates in primary and in general election.
Okay, and what was your relationship with Mr. Mancini?
Talked to him maybe once or twice. I would say I do not have a relationship with RJ.
Okay, and what was, I grabbed the wrong stack here for me, so what was Mr. Mancini's specific job responsibilities as far as you understood?
Campaign manager for House candidates, but specifically only for endorsed candidates in the primary.
And was Gene Schmidt an endorsed candidate in the primary?
No.
Okay. Did you personally monitor or keep records on who these different people like R.J. Mancini worked for?
Personally, no.
Who did keep records of who they were working for?
I would assume the HRCC, but that is only an assumption.
And just real quick for people here, the commissioners, kind of describe the relation. Can you kind of describe the relationship between you and paying for the resources,
Yep.
and the HRCC, which I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but effectively managing and deploying the resources?
Correct. We work with them almost every day. It's not uncommon for the party to work for the House, with the House and Senate political operations. If anyone was on our side monitoring it, would have been our political director. But as far as I know, the management day-to-day of the House campaign managers was the HRCC.
Okay, and who in the HRCC that you were aware of, what, you know, who played key roles in managing those resources in the field?
Sure. Jeff Longstreth, Megan Fitzmartin, Anna Lippincott, and Tommy Ross.
And what, you can be narrow, I'm trying to make this quick, you know, would it be correct to say that Tommy Rolfe had a particular, Rolfe had a particular more role with managing the day-to-day field people?
That is my understanding, that he was genuinely the day-to-day manager, and then he reported up to Megan and Jeff and Anna.
Okay, and would you say that what were the predominant functions that you would say that these people typically did? The 10 people?
Door knocking.
Door knocking, okay. And so, what's your relationship with Tommy Rolfe?
Same as, I would say same as RJ, like, we've probably run into each other once or twice, acquaintances at best. So.
Okay, did the ORP and the HRCC, when it came to the technical aspects of how to do door knocking, you know, list, apps, that kind of stuff, you know, can you describe for me any collaboration there, or there was none, or just basically describe how that worked?
I believe that we all used the same walk app that year, which would have been Campaign Sidekick, and then, you know, us, the party through the RNC would provide the data for that walk app.
Was that you know, you were paying for the resources, was that an expectation that you had or a requirement you put on the HRCC to use that app?
Sorry, one more time. Could you just repeat it? Sorry.
This is what I'm looking for. Was that a requirement on the part of the HRCC, you know, at all, or not, or just a suggestion that they would use that app?
I'm not sure if they had a requirement for their candidates to use that or not. I don't know.
Okay, so the resources that you were paying for by the ORP had access to that app, but you're not aware of whether they used it or not, or whether the HRCC expected or required them to use it.
Correct. As you might imagine, some candidates don't knock any doors, some knock lots of stuff.
And did the data, so I have a question, but my experience with those apps, but correct me, is that you do things like update data, like if somebody enters the door and they're willing to give you your email or their phone number, you put it in there so it makes the database better.
Absolutely.
Okay? That data from that app, did it come back to, did it become ORP property? Like ORP owns the database that comes out of that?
Yes, ORP and the RNC, and then HRCC would have had access to it as well.
Okay, so did you ever analyze in the ORP how much data was coming back from these 10 people?
Me personally, no.
Did anybody that you're aware of?
Yes, I'm sure.
Do you ever remember any metrics or anything that you guys did to see? Because obviously it'd be different if, you know, nobody door knocked, nothing showed up in the app versus a lot showed up.
No, and, you know, part of that's probably because we weren't as, you know, invested in the primary as we are in the general election.
And
we were and then provide resources, but I'm not, you know, following each race day to day.
Okay, and who provided for in-kind, well, so why don't you describe, I don't want to jump ahead, but I want to go quick. So, when you're paying for the resources and they're door knocking for candidates, maybe succinctly describe what's your impression of the candidate's responsibility when it comes to those compensated resources that are doing door knocking for them.
So for the campaign managers, we would have invited it to the HRCC as we were providing them with the resource and then they could go deploy. However, if we did a mailer or anything specific dollars-wise, we would provide in-kind letters to individual candidates.
Okay.
And elected officials.
So say that last part again, I just want to make sure I heard. So you described it, but who was actually telling the candidates? Let's first, you know, what is the in-kind amount they have to show?
Our accounting and operations director at the time, Tom Daines, would have provided that list to the candidates and their committees. Okay, and some of those candidates, would the ORP also do things like separate from these people, like maybe pay for a mailer or something like that? Yes. And would Mr. Daines report that also? Yes. So he would report both HRCC in-kind contributions that involved resources you were compensating, and there would be direct ORP things like we pay for a mailer. Correct. Okay. And
So he, how did, and I, just for sake of discussion here real quick, there's an exhibit M in that stack, but we're only gonna look at it real quick. It's not like, so it's complainant exhibit M,
And Mary?
yes.
On page 52.
Yeah, it says 51 at the 52 at the bottom, but those are all the ones you have in that stack, okay? And, you know, if you flip through that, I'm really just worried about the last part of it, which is on page, it says 54 at the bottom. You know, it's like some letters there.
Mine
And
is at 53.
Exhibit M.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm gonna get one here. I know I have extras because I was looking for. My wife printed these out, so it's her fault. That's my shit, this has been live streamed, I'm gonna get a lot of shit. Okay, so that's the same thing, that is all pages, and you're right, unless my wife screwed up yours, it should be in there, so. But particularly look at the one that says, page 56. And it's to Mark Frazier,
Yes.
February 28th. Just generally describe what's that document there. What is that? What
This
is
is
that?
an example of an in-kind letter we would send to the candidate.
Okay, and then so then what would be the obligation in the example of this one for Mark Frazier?
Well, you would need to report both of those on there,
Is-
his individual report.
As in-kind contributions, correct? Do you, now, this exhibit was from, you can put that back, that's all I wanted to ask about. So that, but it showed, you would agree that that shows both HRCC and ORP?
Yes.
And actually, would you agree that in the last time you testified,
I did
that
not.
you didn't know at the
Yes.
time, like you didn't know that HRCC was being rebuilt through the ORP. And you weren't, and just to be clear with everybody, at the time you testified before, you were not in any ORP position at that point. You had completed your time working at the
That
ORP.
remains true.
Yeah, so you didn't have so that would, like, I'm assuming you don't have access to records and stuff like that at this point.
No.
Did you ever, you know, intellectually, and this is not a set you up answer, our question, get curious about, did we ever get told to bill Gene Schmidt for RJ Mancini?
No, because if we were, we would have done it, and also I would have lost my ever-loving mind because it was a very specific instruction to the HRCC and my own staff that we only work for endorsed candidates.
Okay, so would you say that based on that experience of the last time you testified, that you realized that the HRCC had been using resources contrary to your instructions?
No, Fraser was endorsed in the primary, and it's not surprising to me that Tom would have worked pretty closely with the HRCC on in-kind contributions. You know, we're a team, we work together.
No, that's not the question I asked. So in that prior testimony, the issue was RJ Mancini specifically, you know, billed out in kind through your operation. And so that was the question. And just my clarifying question here is, it may be a little redundant and I apologize, but the distinction was Gene Schmidt was, correct me if I answer yes or no, Gene Schmidt was endorsed or not by the ORP?
She was not.
Okay, and therefore, your instruction to the HRCC would be that RJ Mancini was not permitted to do any work for a non-endorsed candidate.
I mean, it was not specific to RJ, it was blanket, we only provide resources for endorsed candidates.
Okay, and
Testify to the truth.
so in that instance, in that testimony, would you say that, you know, you were only there for part of it, you know, so I don't know how much you paid attention after that, so you can say like, I don't know, you know, I don't want to set you up on it, that, you know, it called into your mind that HRCC had used some of your resources on non-endorsed candidates?
Well, I mean, if they did, it would have been without my knowledge or anybody else's at ORPs.
Okay, so therefore, the only way you would know it would be that HRCC reported it to you so that Tom Baines could do a proper letter.
Correct.
Okay. In that mix. Now, do you did you reconcile, do you know if you reconciled the total payroll for each person, like RJ Mancini, with what was in kinded?
Personally, I did not, but Tom Haynes would have.
Does Tom Danes, do you know that he did? I mean, or you would assume that he, remember before you knew, you thought he never rebilled HRCC at all, right? That wasn't part of his duty at all. So I want to be clear, I don't want you to answer a question yet, it's not like I'm trying to trick you on a question. But
the term rebuild, can you define that?
well, so you pay for the resources.
Yes.
They worked under the supervision of the HRCC.
Correct.
The HRCC reported back to you where they worked so that you could produce in-kind letters to the candidates to put on their reports. Is that a correct characterization of?
No, I believe we in-kinded the staff directly to HRCC, not to the candidates.
Well, HRCC, I don't believe would show them as in-kind contributions. It was a pass-through, right? That's why, so again, go back to Exhibit M. You don't, if you just remember it, you don't even need.
No, I'll go back. I'm looking at it. There's nothing on here about staff.
So you're, that's an excellent point you just made, okay? So that's an excellent point that you got me on making an excellent point. Is the example letter of Mark Frazier and the example letter for Jason, which is the next page, 57. Man, that is an excellent point. The in-kind from the HRCC is only for media stuff, it looks like.
Correct.
So you know what? I think that back when you testified before, you might have been correct. And I ask you, based on looking at this, that it does not appear, would you agree that it does not appear based on here that you did, it appears that you did not participate in-kind reporting to candidates on those HRCC, on the resources that you provided to the HRCC?
To the individual candidates, we did not in-kind the staff resources. The in-kinds, we can in-kind to the HRCC, and that's where the staff would have been in-kinded, to the HRCC from the ORP.
Okay, and then the candidates would, then it would be the HRCC's obligation to inform the candidates of how much was spent on their campaign, of those compensated resources.
That is my understanding, yes.
Well, I mean, that's a great thing that you brought up because, you know, it appears that, like that there was not this that happened in there. Okay, I think I'm almost done.
Mr. Hicks, let me just interject. I mean, it's nice of you trying to move on quickly, don't get me wrong, but don't overlook something in your haste, okay? Just make sure you take sufficient time.
Okay, I think one of the things I had included, and I just to look at it is, well, just so I don't get nailed for I didn't ask a question, Exhibit J, okay, is, so complainant Exhibit J is an excerpt of the transcript. That might be the wrong one. I'm directing you to the wrong one, I think.
Transcript of my testimony?
Yeah, I directed you to the wrong document. L. It's Exhibit L. Unless I screwed up.
I think that's Megan.
I think L is you, isn't it?
Oh, you went, no,
Yeah, L. I'm sorry for saying the wrong one.
no. Yeah, this is, I believe this is me.
Yeah, and so just, I will make, these are excerpts of your testimony, and based on your testimony today, you can look at these, or I have a version with things highlighted. I'm just skimming it here. So my question is, Well, look at page, it's at the top of the page, it's at the bottom in blue, it says page 47. Okay, and the net of it is that you make it, there's a questionnaire based on your knowledge of field workers. In the middle of the page, and you answer, well, it wouldn't be from us, it would be, we're in kind of HRCC. So this would go back to your testimony here, that the HRCC is the person who had the responsibility for in-kinding the resources. Correct?
Yep.
And, okay, so I think that's all the questions I have, and just as a reference to why that exhibit from your prior testimony, I don't believe that anything you've testified here is at all in conflict with your prior testimony. Everything you said here is consistent with your prior testimony. So I thank you, I'm sorry if you had to wait a long time.
No, it's okay. The truth
Sitting around here.
setting free, so.
Thank you.
That's gonna be the phrase of the day.
Mr. Secor, I just had a couple questions as well. Mr. Mancini, who we've talked about, was not directed by you or the ORP to work on Gene Schmidt's campaign, was she?
Correct.
And you provided no resources to the Gene Schmidt campaign because she was an unendorsed candidate, correct?
Correct.
And if that was done by other parties, it was done without your knowledge, correct?
100% correct.
And any staff that was on ORP or Republican Party's payroll, whether it's Mr. Mancini or someone else, you in-kinded that staff to the HRCC.
Yes.
And any claim that people worked on Gene Schmidt's campaign with ORP resources that were not in-kinded would not be accurate, correct?
To my knowledge, that's correct, yes.
Thank you, sir. I have no other questions.
I have a regret.
Let's see if the commission
Yeah,
members have
okay.
any questions first. Any questions from members?
Okay.
Go ahead.
I just want to, so look at Exhibit H, and that's that. That's your affidavit, and you just made a representation. I want to clarify the representation you made in response to Mr. O'Brien's question.
Okay.
Is, and I didn't, it was quick, but he came up here and said something to the effect of, if this happened, it didn't happen, it didn't happen, or it would be a false allegation. Do you know whether R.J. Mancini, do you have personal knowledge of whether R.J. Mancini did work for Gene Schmidt or not?
I do not.
Okay. Do you have was there any management system in place that you're aware of that would have alerted you had an HRCC, had a ORP compensated resource worked for a candidate that was not ORP endorsed?
Our political director would have worked pretty closely with Tommy Rolfe. If that was happening, he would have known and notified me.
And who was the political director at that time?
Cameron Sage.
Okay. And your affidavit, your H, because I just want to clear this up, it says, it's a brief affidavit, and it says, the second paragraph, it says the Ohio Republican Party did not specifically assign R.J. Mancini or any other person. And so it doesn't say, for example, what your testimony was. It doesn't say, I'm not saying it says something untrue. And my question, it doesn't say, what your testimony is that we in-kinded these to the HRCC, and once we did that, we really didn't know who they were working for. That was the HRCC's problem at that point. And so, it says you did not specifically assign. Would it be a more correct characterization is that you really didn't know what R.J. Mancini was doing once you had in-kinded him, other than that you know that you had given instruction that he was only supposed to be working with endorsed candidates?
I'm having trouble answering that question. It's odd. I think all of those things are true. We did not specifically assign R.J. Mancini or any other person to specifically work or volunteer on the Gene Schmidt campaign. I believe had he been doing that, we would have found out because Cameron Sexter was working with the HRCC, plus some fine folks in Claremont County certainly would have told us that an ORP employee was working for an unendorsed candidate.
So that's all hearsay, right? You don't know that. You're just now making representations that you probably would have found out. Did you find out?
No.
Was there any other situation where you found that out?
No.
That a candidate was doing, I mean, sorry, one of your paid resources was doing something contrary to what your instructions were?
No.
Okay. Did you specifically assign any of your resources to any specific candidate?
No.
Okay. And you also had to comment here about volunteer.
Correct.
And that was part of your testimony before we talked about that, why that was even in there. So why was the word volunteer in there?
To rule out any fact that we would have directed him to work or volunteer with him. I didn't know how to answer that question last time, to be honest, so.
I can't pull up your, we could pull up your, I think it's in that excerpt, but, the point is that you had no role in any it's a correct statement to say the ORP had no role whatsoever in instructing anybody to volunteer for any of these individual candidate races.
Yeah.
Okay, is it a correct characterization that you guys paid for whatever it was, 8, 10 resources?
Mm-hmm.
You in-kinded them to HRCC and they got their direction from the HRCC.
Correct.
And once that happened, that was kind of, you trusted that the HRCC was using them according to your wishes.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
If I could ask one question. You have no idea what HRCC did in kind to house candidates in the March primary, do you?
No.
Thank you.
Any further questions from commissioners? Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we'll go get,
Thank you, man.
Carol.
So I would like to call Mr. Ricker for a very brief question.
Me?
Yes.
Concerning?
Huh?
Concerning? I mean, I'm not sure.
Regarding what he's saying.
Regarding your past documentation of a decision and what resources it was talking about.
I object to Mr. Richter being called for the proper reason.
What's pertinent here?
I think that will be revealed in my question. Well, my question will be very quick.
I object to Mr. Hicks has not done anything quick. That has been my observation.
We don't need to comment.
Again, the kangaroo,
No, thank you. Well, no, he's been told.
if I did that, I would get chewed out.
He just did. He
I
just
did.
was told not to do that. It's not.
And I'll withdraw the
It
comment.
doesn't help anything.
I will withdraw the comment.
Thank you.
Mr.
But I do
Ricker was
object
called,
to Mr. Richter being called.
Mr. Ricker was called by Don Bray and took the stand.
Yeah, I was, the last time the friend.
If he has no objection and the commission
He has
has
an
no
objection.
then we will go ahead and we will allow it.
For the record, the
It is recorded that you object.
objection is overruled.
Yeah, simply stated.
You need to swear in.
Yeah, he's an attorney, so.
Right.
Do I have to swear you in?
Yeah, somebody's got to swear me in.
Okay, okay,
As the chairman.
yes. Do you swear that these comments you're about to give in these proceedings are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Hicks, you said it would be quick, and we believe you.
He said, here.
Oh,
I get confused because I'm told be quick and I'm told don't go too fast.
well,
So
that was your
When to
comment.
measure what the definition of very quick is, starting now.
Yes.
okay, so I need to get the right exhibit. So I'm going to ask you to look at Exhibit 11. Complainant Exhibit 11.
Okay.
I put it right behind you.
Yeah.
So,
And I might object again at this point in time when I see what Mr. Hicks is asking about. Exhibit 11 is a decision in an unrelated case, has nothing to do with relevant issues in this case.
can I respond to that objection?
No,
This,
no, you may not. Okay, so we're gonna move forward with this and then see where it takes us and we'll go from there. Mr.
so you recognize this document?
Yeah.
Okay, and what is it, basically, quick? What
It's
is
a
it?
decision in finding of the case against Alan Freeman and the committee to elect Alan Freeman.
And if do you recall who were the ORP resources, field worker resources, or resource that was involved in that decision?
Objection, it has nothing to do with what ORP resources were used against, that were in the campaign of Gene Schmidt. They may work on 400 other campaigns, that, the resources that he alleged were used were ORP resources in her campaign in March of 2020. And what Alan Freeman did, and you worked for him, is irrelevant.
Sustained.
And I get to respond to his objection, I think, before you sustain. Okay, so
Actually, if he has an objection, if I sustain it, it means you can't respond.
yeah, but I'm allowed to respond to his objection. So the point here is this question, R.J. Mancini was the common thread in Alan Freeman and Gene Schmidt. Neither of them were endorsed candidates. I want to ask questions because there's already been a finding by this relating to the reporting of R.J. Mancini on campaign finance reports in a prior event. That's extremely relevant since R.J. Mancini, by his own testimony, and I'll see if we'll have the same testimony this time, only worked for two candidates, Alan Freeman and Gene Schmidt. So there's already been a finding adjudicated by this body relating to R.J. Mancini. It's part of this decision, and I just want to clarify what was found by this commission in the prior decision related to R.J. Mancini. That's totally fair, totally germane.
And I would respond that this case is to be heard and decided by you commission members on the evidence from this witness stand right here, not some other hearing, some other decision, some other person.
If R.J. Mancini only worked for two candidates, Alan Freeman and Gene Schmidt, and neither of them were ever reported any in-kind contribution for R.J. Mancini, I need to isolate, just like I did with the Goldstein invoice, that it did not include these resources. I need to isolate that he wasn't billed to somebody else. That's what I need to isolate. And we can go through all the testimony that resulted in this decision again if you want, but I just wanted to highlight one paragraph and ask Mr. Ricker a question about a paragraph in here relating to that prior decision that is specific to what R.J. Mancini was doing.
And again, I would object because it has nothing to do with what was done in this case, what Mancini did in another case and what the commission found in another case where Ms. Schmidt was not served a copy of the complaint, was not present, did not have counsel, could not ask questions, would violate due process here today. So at least again, prove it by evidence in this hearing room, not by looking at some finding made months ago.
So I'm assuming in your case, Mr. O'Brien, that you'll make the argument that R.J. Mancini was maybe billed to somebody else. So I think I have the right to ascertain that A, he was not included in the Goldstein invoice, and B, he was not billed to somebody else. In this decision, if we want to bring the witnesses in here and reestablish the same facts that resulted in this decision, I'm glad to do that.
Then that's what we should do, because we can only deal with what we're dealing with that's been told to us by different witnesses that you yourself have presented. So I don't think that going back into something that happened in a different case is proving or disproving. I think if we can bring them in and they can testify to whatever you ask them, but I don't think bringing in what happened in the Freeman case will prove or disprove that what you're trying to.
It will prove that R.J. Mancini was not charged, was not reported someplace else.
In the Freeman case, but we don't know about in this case, so I think that we have to, at this point, sustain what Mr. O'Brien asked. Mr. Richter can step down, and if we can get, the only way we're gonna get to that truth is to have those people come in and then present us under your line of questioning.
The truth I'm getting to is the finding that already took place.
But we all know that.
May I add, I wasn't here in the Freeman case, so I personally am not going to accept a finding that was based on evidence in a case that I had no involvement in as some sort of evidentiary fact for this case.
Okay.
And that's what I'm trying to establish too, is that, this group, this commission that's sitting before you would rather hear it from R.J. Mancini or whomever else. I mean, we just heard Rob Secor say that that is not the case. So I think that it doesn't help or not.
Okay, I get you, because just so you know, in order to do that, then I need to bring in Susan Jones and Alan Freeman. Because those were the key witnesses to that point in the prior case, and you just told me I need to establish that through the same witnesses that were used to establish that R.J. Mancini was not charged to another campaign.
Right,
So,
this is
appreciate
not
that.
going to do that.
Okay.
This is not going to do that, and so I sustain what Mr.
And I would
Prince-
also say that it would be far outside the scope of the motion in limine order that the commission adopted. What Susan Jones has to say about Mancini, or what Freeman has to say about Mancini, is totally, absolutely, and completely irrelevant to this case.
The motion in limine has nothing to do
Okay.
with whether R.J. Mancini was
Mr.
charged to
Richter.
another candidate.
You accept that.
See, I was looking forward to cross-examining him under oath.
Well,
Sorry.
you may
I have
have your
some
day
questions too.
another day. Your day may come some other time, but not today. So who's the next?
That I would call, who I want to call is Tommy Rolfe.
Okay, is Tommy?
Either
Rolfe?
Tommy Rolfe or Megan Fitzmartin, either one of those two.
I think Mr.
He was going
I
to
think
get
we
Mr.
could.
Carey, he said, when we get.
I don't want to call Mr. Caraway until after Tommy Rolfe and Megan Fitzmartin's testimony, because I want him.
Oh,
Mr. Caraway
let's
before
take out
the
the
end.
Mr.
We're
Roll.
gonna,
Call
we're
roll.
gonna get,
And by the way, Tommy Rolfe and Megan Fitzmartin, I believe my question we can get done and they can be excused.
okay.
So by the way, we never said this, but we should agree that Rob Sikora is excused, correct?
I think he
But that's a question whether, that means whether they can be recalled or
He's
not.
gone, right?
But Mr. Knight, it has to do with whether they can be called back again.
I understand, I understand.
And I apologize, I was under the understanding you both were finished with him.
I am, and I think
apologize for
he
that.
believes he is. Oh, yeah.
Right.
To the door pretty quick.
So, thank you.
Debating whether I would do a recommendation or something.
No,
It's never a situation that's come up, so I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't want to be shouted at, and, yeah, and I don't want anyone to shout at me, so.
What kind of Diet Coke is that?
No, I'm just cycling through caffeine at this point. This is a vanilla Coke.
Oh, it's a
This
vanilla
one.
Coke.
Dr. Pepper, water, vanilla Coke, water.
Okay, okay.
All right, so
Usually avoid it.
everyone is present, so
On your
Mr.
roll.
Hicks.
Who I've never met or seen, this is the first time I get to see what it looks like.
Sure, it's a pleasure for you.
As it is for all of us. Mr. Richter, we sort of.
Oh, that would help if I did that, wouldn't it? Mr. Rolfe, do you swear or affirm that what you are about to tell the commission in testimony is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Please have a seat.
And the, can you, Mr. Rolfe, just for the sake of getting started out here, can you just describe for the commission, what your role was during the?
Can I interject for a second, just to say, could you identify yourself for the commission, please?
My name is Tommy Rolfe. Everything else, we don't know that.
Thank you very much.
What's your middle initial?
That's okay.
That's okay, is your middle initial? Okay, so Mr. Rolfe, can you describe what your job was during the 2020 Republican primary?
Yeah, I went for the House Republican Caucus, campaign caucus, and I was the deputy political director, essentially acted as the field staffer.
Okay, and that would be commonly called the HRCC
Yes, sir.
at the time?
Yep.
And do you still work there?
I do not.
Okay, what do you do now?
Now I work for the Ohio House of Representatives.
Okay, and what do you do for the Ohio House of
I'm
Representatives?
a policy advisor.
Okay, in the 2020 campaign or primary, we're talking about the primary, not the general election. Who was paying you?
JPL and Associates.
Okay, and who did you take direction from?
Megan Fitzmartin.
Okay, and
And Speaker Larry Householder.
okay, the HRCC as we know it, that term, were you aware of, were there any people actually paid by the HRCC?
I don't recall.
Okay, who would you say was the head of the HRCC?
Speaker Householder.
Okay, and then operationally, you know, I'm assuming Speaker Householder wasn't spending all day at the HRCC. Who was the day-to-day lead of the HRCC?
That would have been Jeff and Megan.
Jeff, maybe say their name, I don't know if you might have said this, but
Jeff Longstreth and Megan Fitzmartin.
equally, or one was superior to the other?
one was superior entitled to the other,
And which one was superior?
Mr. Longstreth.
Okay, and JPL and Associates, that's who you said paid you? Okay, and what does JPL and Associates, if you say that all out, what does it actually, what does the JPL stand for?
Jeff P. Longstreth and Associates.
Okay, so the company you worked for was Jeff Longstreth's company?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe briefly what your day-to-day role was in the 2020 primary?
Yeah, so we had several campaigns throughout the state during the primary, and we had candidates in different races, and my role was to direct the campaign managers in each campaign.
And what's a campaign manager?
Campaign manager is a individual who's going out and knocking doors and kind of liaising between the candidate and us at HRCC.
Okay, and it's come up here before that the term campaign manager is used very broadly to sounds up here, but in reality, is it a fair characterization that the typical person was their primary function was being a door knocker?
Correct.
But their title, they were called campaign managers.
Yes.
Did they, who directed their strategy? Like, who directed what they did on a day-in, day-out basis?
I would have been their touch point on day-to-day stuff, but they would have heard from everybody at HRCC on varying things.
And when you say everybody,
they might have spoken with Anna on payroll or Megan on something else.
and can you characterize Anna, that's a new name you just mentioned, I think.
She was on our team as well.
Okay, and what was the difference between the roles of Anna, Megan, and yourself?
So Anna, I guess, did more HR sort of things. Megan was more of a strategist, and like I said, I did more day-to-day stuff.
And when you say HR kind of things, would it be better characterization to be financial type of things? Billing, or that kind of stuff?
Sure. Yeah, she helped make sure that their checks were appearing on time, that sort of thing.
Okay. And so when you say other people in HRCC, were there people, I'm not talking about these field workers, other than the people you just mentioned, were there any other key people in the HRCC? Stephen Caraway, at the time, was HRCC, okay. And what was his role, to your understanding?
So he was equal to myself, except he just focused on the southern part of the state.
The southern part of the state. And your focus, I'm not gonna ask you questions about his focus, because that's hearsay on your part, but your focus then was all candidates?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and are you aware of the distinction between ORP endorsed candidates and non-endorsed candidates?
Yes.
Okay, and what is that distinction in your mind?
The distinction was whether or not they were endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party.
From a day-to-day operational standpoint, what was the distinction?
The candidates, there was not a distinction. I don't know if I fully understand the question. We treated each candidate the same.
And when you say candidate, you would be referring to HRCC endorsed candidates. That would mean the speakers endorsed candidates. Is that a correct characterization?
Yes.
If a candidate was there any difference operationally for you if a candidate that was, for example, speaker endorsed was not ORP endorsed?
I don't recall there being a difference. I don't remember.
Okay. I'm not asking a question like, well, can you remember every name? I don't mean that, but, there were a set of resources of which R.J. Mancini was one, that they were paid for by, do you know who they were paid for by?
I believe he was an employee of ORP.
Okay. And what were some of the other people, I'm not asking for an exhaustive list, but other people that you know of that were like R.J. Mancini, that they were being paid for by the ORP?
We had maybe 8 to 10 other campaign managers.
8 to 10? Okay.
Roughly.
And how did you interact with those people? And I'm not asking, day to day I interact with them, I came and taught them how to knock doors, I did, You know, kind of just describe how you manage those people.
We would set different goals for them, and I would ensure that goals were being met, and so we would have touch bases throughout the week.
Okay, and the different people, did they have, did you direct them to work with different candidates?
Yes, different candidates and different campaign managers.
Okay, and is it so those people, of which R.J. Mancini was one, you provided the direction as to which candidates they work with?
I did not set them up specifically with individual candidates, but once they got to their candidates, then I was their point of contact.
Then how did they get to their candidates?
I don't recall. They would have been looking for a position to campaign to get new experience, and so they came to us and we just kind of figured out where they would go.
Did the ORP provide any direction as to who they should be working with or
No.
assigned to?
I guess to answer your question, it would have been Megan and myself and the team as a whole.
They gave that direction. Do you know Rob Secar?
I do.
During this campaign period, what was your interaction with Rob Secar?
Very minimal.
Okay. Describe, then, if it was very minimal, what interaction did you have? I think we had lunch or something, so.
Yeah, I did not talk to him on a day-to-day basis. We would see each other around, but I would say I worked with Cam Sagis, or the political director, much more often.
Okay, okay. You said you set goals for these people, okay? What kind of goals, what were the goals?
1,000 doors a week, making sure that social media posts were appearing, that sort of thing, making sure that the campaign was looking good.
And when you say social media posts, what do you mean by that?
Some candidates did their own social media, other candidates preferred somebody to help out, so.
Okay, so is it correct to say that two roles these people had were door knockers and potentially, not necessarily, do social media, maintenance, posting, stuff like that for candidates, okay? And then any other responsibilities they had, or, I don't want to, obviously you're saying that not everybody, I understand that not everybody did social media, not everybody did, is it fair to say everybody had a door knocking responsibility, okay? Some of them had would it be correct to say some of them also took on a social media responsibility for the candidate?
Yeah.
Okay, were there any other responsibilities that were kind of a pattern that any of them took on?
Staffing their candidate at an event, but those three things are about the extent of it.
Okay. Did any of these people get direction from you to, for example, try to coordinate volunteers that could extend their reach and do more door knocking?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so was that, you said 8 to 10 resources somewhere in that, the ones that were ORP paid 8 to 10 resources, correct? Okay, beyond the ORP paid ones, how many resources?
I don't recall if there were any. I'm not sure.
Okay, so the universe of the resources that you were managing day to day was the 8 to 10 ORP resources, and there could have been a few other, but it wasn't a significant number, like there were 20 other people. It was somewhere 8 to 15 total resources that you were managing?
It's my understanding that they were all paid by ORP, but I don't know that as fact.
All paid by ORP. Okay. Did you ever door knock with R.J. Mancini?
I tried to door knock with all of our campaign managers at one point or another.
Okay. You said you set a goal of 1,000 a week or something, 1,000 a week. How did you know whether they were doing 1,000 a week?
We could pull the data from the app that we were using, which I believe was Campaign Sidekick, and I could track what they were doing every day.
Okay. And so they all had to use this app. It was a requirement to use it. If they didn't do 1,000 a day, or not a week, if they didn't do 1,000 a week, would there be a repercussion on them?
In different districts, it's easier to do it in a suburban district than it is a more rural district, so
But you would not, for example, call up Rob Sikor and say, this person stinks at door knocking, we need him replaced with somebody else. Did anything like that ever happen? Okay. Did most of these people meet their quotas?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember which candidates RJ Mancini worked with?
So RJ's from Claremont County originally, so it made sense for him to go down there. We set him up with Alan Freeman.
Okay, anybody else?
He might have, I don't believe he did any work for Representative Schmidt, but I don't recall.
If I told you that he's testified in the past that he did do work for Representative Schmidt, would that surprise you?
Objection unless we talk about, quote, how much work. Makes it sound like he worked continuously.
Yeah, we don't have anything on the record at this point in this case as it relates to Mr. Mancini, so rephrase your question.
Are you aware of, I'm gonna withdraw the question, ask a different question. That's okay. So how many, you had 8 to 10 resources paid for by ORP. How many races were there?
I would say we were involved in about 8 to 10
8 to 10 races?
that we hired campaign managers for. Not every race needed a campaign manager.
Okay, so 8 to 10 races. And what caused the race to get focused?
If polling suggested that the race was close and they needed additional help, we would enlist the campaign manager to help knock doors and hopefully get their poll numbers up.
Okay, when the, so if you thought like polling and stuff like that would dictate it, were there any kind of like game time decisions where you had to move resources? Like, oh shit, a poll came out that makes us worried about this race, so we're gonna move somebody over there?
That would be a reasonable thing to think, yeah.
Okay. Can you look at exhibit, it's gonna be in the stack that's sitting there right behind you. I believe it's gonna be exhibit number 6. Complainants exhibit number 6. For those of you, because this gets into these ones that had to double their numbers, below the 6 it says hearing documents. On the page numbers on the version I gave you that have printouts of page numbers was page 33.
Is that the former
Yeah.
exhibits or the today's?
The ones for today are letters, the ones from the last time are numbered.
The former.
So it's from the former. Okay. By the way, before I ask a question about this, did you ever do any reporting back to the ORP on what these resources were doing?
I talked with members of the staff at the ORP on a regular basis, reporting on what exactly they were doing.
Yeah.
That could have come up. I'm sure it did.
But was there any regular reporting? Like every month we have to give, or as a campaign, so like every week we have to give them, any sort of reporting or just more ad hoc?
I think it was just kind of regular updates. Sure.
So that you would have been the one giving the updates? Correct?
At certain times.
So you just said regular updates, which to me implies a regular format, like here's our summary of what we did in the last week.
We would have if I remember correctly, we would have a weekly call with the ORP, just to touch base.
And were they interested in statistics like how many door knocks and stuff like that?
I'm sure we talked about that at times, yeah.
Were there documents that you provided back to them on the door knocks?
Not to my knowledge, I don't recall.
Okay, so within Exhibit 6, and I don't want to confuse anybody, but there's an Exhibit 3 within there. I'm sorry, that might not be the right one. Within Exhibit 6, that's not the one I want to look at. It's Exhibit 5 within there. And the numbers, on my numbers, in bluish color, it says 40, it's page 41. It's Exhibit 5 within, just to make it extra confusing, if this is, yeah, it's Exhibit 5 within Exhibit 6. Okay? You recognize that?
I'm sorry if you lost me here.
So within Exhibit 6, You only need that one document, I'm not gonna ask you about other ones.
Page 41.
So you're not gonna keep these in order. And it has a blue page 41
Yep.
at the bottom. You familiar with that note? You recognize that?
I'm looking at it for the first time in, I'm sure, 3 years, but,
Well, familiarize yourself.
okay.
Okay. So I see, this is from you, correct?
Correct.
You, and then it's copied to a set of people, one of which is RJ Mancini. Okay? And so within that note, it's making reference to Gene Schmidt's race. And I assume there's other resources. So were these resources giving support to Gene Schmidt's race?
They were simply updates.
Well, then why aren't all the races in there?
There might not have been changes in those other races for polling locations.
So you're saying that you were producing, so my understanding was, so our House of Representatives is how many people?
It's 99.
So and they run how many, every 2 years, correct?
Correct.
So that means there's 99 races every 2 years. Of those 99 races, I think your prior testimony is you were focusing on 8 to 10.
Correct.
Was Tom Young one of those 8 to 10?
He was.
Was Grandel one of those 8 to 10?
Yes.
Was Schmidt one of those 8 to 10?
Yes.
So again, I'll ask the question, were your resources supporting Jean Schmidt in her race that was, you just said was one of the 8 to 10? So the answer was yes, they were?
We were monitoring her race. We were supportive of her campaign. Did specific resources go towards her in the form of a campaign manager? I don't recall us ever sending a campaign manager to her.
Well, but let me just then probe on this. You said that Jeff Longstreth and Megan Fitzmartin and Stephen Caraway were doing things, and you were doing certain things. And ones were more doing these more strategic things, and then you had the people that were door knocking. Wouldn't the change potentially supporting or having door knockers work with a certain candidate be something that it would be a strategy you guys would be doing, and then you tell people, versus you just, oh, we're just gonna randomly update you on a candidate that we're not working with?
I'm not sure I followed the question.
So, you're of these 3 candidates in this list, you acknowledge that 2 of them had campaign managers doing door knocking and potentially other activities. Is that a fair statement?
I remember Representative Grandel having one. Truthfully, I don't remember if we had a campaign manager for Representative Young.
Okay.
We might have had somebody, a volunteer of some kind, I don't know.
So then your assertion would be that this email is across the state? Any candidate that had a change in polling location, summary?
Of the races we were looking at, these must have had some kind of polling location change, and so I wanted to make sure that people were aware. Yeah.
Okay, what do you mean by, define the term looking at, the races we were looking at?
The races that the speaker had a specific candidate in mind to run.
Okay, and then but you're saying that I'm just trying to connect what you're saying is that this note, would it be a fair statement that your representation is, this doesn't mean we were or were not, anybody was doing any door knocking for Gene Schmidt? You can't tell from this email.
This email has nothing to do with door knocking. The folks that I sent this email to were our campaign managers, and so I was updating them loosely on what changes might be happening.
Okay.
And that other changes could happen, so please keep tabs on polling locations.
So, on that list of people up above, Brandon Hendrickson, are all those people, to your knowledge, ORP paid resources?
With the exception of Luke Householder, I don't remember if he was reimbursed at all, or who would have paid him, I don't remember. But the rest of them, I believe, were paid by ORP.
Okay, and then how did you get hooked up with Supervisor Luke Householder?
The speaker wanted to give his son some expertise, some experience campaigning.
And where was Luke Householder assigned by you?
He was originally assigned to Alan Freeman's campaign until he had to be moved
Why did he have to be moved?
for his own personal safety,
Why?
because you were stalking him at his hotel.
I was stalking him. Have I ever been charged with stalking somebody?
That's my knowledge.
Okay, so you made a representation. Would it be a fair characterization that I got tipped off and took a picture of him coming back and forth to a hotel one
I don't
time?
think that he can speak to that, to know whether you were tipped off or not, so I don't.
Well,
think
he's
that's-
obviously familiar. So describe for me what you actually know, not what you,
I
so
know-
describe for me what you know versus that I was doing some criminal act supposedly.
I know.
I don't think there's an objection to the use of the criminal, there's, doesn't necessarily mean there was a criminal stalking.
It certainly implies what he
Stalking
said.
is a dictionary.
I object to the use of the term
Follow.
stalking relating to me. It's a
May I
characterization, not a
Okay, we
fact.
will, that is, I will sustain that we are not gonna use that term,
Thank you.
okay?
My
So,
apologies.
so let's take that out of our questioning or our responses, and let's, you can rephrase or move forward, please.
So what, you said he had to be moved. What actually, fact only, not, adjectives and adverbs and, what happened with Luke Householder that precipitated him being moved?
From what I recall, there was a Facebook post from your account that was in front of his truck or his hotel, one of the two, and we, as a team, felt uncomfortable with that.
Okay, and you felt uncomfortable because you felt I was a threat to his safety?
Correct.
Okay, did you at all feel uncomfortable that Larry Householder's involvement with the races was a big issue? And so his son being there was creating political consternation for the candidates?
I don't follow the question.
Did any of your discussions involve the concept that it was politically damaging and he became a liability to the candidates because in a race that involved Householder and dark money and all this sort of stuff, the fact the speaker's son was roaming around the districts, the two districts, became a political liability? Did that discussion or anything like that ever take place?
I object because it posits questions, assuming facts that aren't in evidence.
I hear what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I'll let him answer the question.
Luke was, I believe, 19 years old at the time. He was simply getting experience knocking doors. Nobody knew who he was. He was just a kid trying to get some campaign experience.
Okay. Do you know where he was, that picture, you're familiar with the picture, where he was staying?
I don't recall the place.
Was it a home, a residence, or a hotel,
It
or?
was a hotel,
Okay.
Holiday Inn.
Do you know, and you provided supervision to Luke Householder, who was paying his hotel bill?
I don't recall.
So, you don't, so
I don't recall.
you have no knowledge of who was paying his hotel bill?
Correct.
But you assigned him to go to that area,
Yes.
okay? And obviously, he would have needed a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any discussion with him or anybody else on who was gonna pay for the travel and lodging expenses?
Not that I recall. I'm sure somebody.
Well, who other than you would have had that discussion?
I would have told him, I would have been the one who set him up in the hotel, who actually paid for the hotel. I do not know the answer to that.
Okay. Did Stephen Caraway have involvement with him being put in that hotel?
Not to my knowledge, no.
If I told you that Stephen Caraway told me that he was involved in putting that hotel, would you have reason?
It wouldn't be.
So objection, it's, what, Stephen Caraway allegedly told Mr. Hicks.
Sustained, that's hearsay.
Okay. Okay, so, but you would acknowledge that somebody, it could have been Luke, somebody had to be paying this hotel bill.
I hope somebody can let it tell me.
It's a pretty fleabag hotel, so you could probably dash out by the way, do you remember the context of the post? Obviously, this post made you feel unsafe, for his safety and so forth. Do you remember the context of the post, what was highlighted in the post?
I do not.
Okay. All right. If you go back to that same document, Exhibit 3, and within Exhibit 6 or whatever we're on, there's an exhibit entitled Exhibit 3. Okay, so Exhibit 3 at the top is a note from who?
That is from Stephen Caraway.
Okay. And what's it directing?
It is not directing anything, but he is letting RJ know that he's being added to the James Facebook page.
Okay, and so that was one of the functions you described that not all, but some of these 8 to 10 people did.
Yes.
Okay, so, and you were copied on this note correctly, correct?
Correct.
So were you not then aware that RJ Mancini was doing something for Gene Schmidt?
I don't know if he ever made a post. I don't recall what this email is actually about, other than him being added to for Facebook.
Okay, so right below that is another note, because this was part of the stream. And that note is from you. The one above it's from Stephen Caraway. And then what is it directing?
To take pictures and video of, looks like there was a Miami Township committee meeting.
Okay. And who, of pictures and video who?
Of candidates in the race.
Of what race?
I don't remember the district, but the race that Gene Schmidt was part of.
Is it just for sake of time here? Does it not say Schmidt, Dills, and Blevins? Is that what it says?
Yes.
And of those 3 candidates, which one of them was endorsed by the speaker?
Representative Schmidt.
Which one of them was endorsed by the ORP?
Don't recall.
Ms. Schmidt, you'll answer the question. Okay, so, and were any of them endorsed by the ORP?
I don't recall.
So were there any cases where you had people supporting a candidate other than the one that was endorsed by the ORP?
I don't recall.
Were you aware of the difference between candidates endorsed by the ORP versus not?
I would have at the time, but I don't recall who was and who wasn't.
Okay, so we know Ms. Schmidt, she's here. Do you recall Dills and Blevins and who they were?
A little bit, but it's been a couple of years now.
Were either of those 2 people running against Alan Freeman?
I don't believe so. I believe they were both running against Representative Schmidt, but I don't recall.
Okay, so are you not here directing that services be provided to Gene Schmidt in a race against Joe Dills and Dylan Blevins?
Yes, I was directing pictures to be taken.
Okay, so doesn't that mean that RJ Mancini was in fact doing work at your direction for Gene Schmidt?
We may have had him do something here or there just because we didn't have anybody else to fulfill that role, but I don't recall.
I'm just making a factual statement, so I'd like a yes or no answer. I think I'm trying to nail it down to the truth and the facts. Yes or no?
Objection, move to strike his editorial comments.
Okay. Sustained, move on, ask your question.
So, yes or no? Does this note not show you directly giving instruction to provide support to Gene Schmidt?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. I'll stop there with that one. Those notes were from, I believe these notes were from some discovery from R.J. Mancini, where I only received a couple of notes. Do you believe that were there other times when you had similar direction relating to doing something or supporting the Schmidt campaign?
Can you repeat the question, please?
So I just make it a background and then the questions, I want to be clear. So I got, just for your knowledge, these two emails that I highlighted came through R.J. Mancini in Discovery and R.J. Mancini in a prior, and that's the only, I got a very narrow scope of any information. My question to you is, were there other times where you made emails that I might not be aware of otherwise that were directing R.J. Mancini to do something for Gene Schmidt?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you believe that was the one and only instance of you ever directing them to do something for Gene Schmidt? Or him to do something for Gene Schmidt?
It is certainly possible, but I don't recall.
Okay. Is it also that, since you said it's possible, is it also possible that on a lot of other times you gave direction to do something for Gene Schmidt?
No.
Is that possible?
If it was more than once, it would be a small handful of times.
So it could be a small handful of times.
Sure. We did
Okay.
not have a lot of resources in the form of a campaign. We had no campaign manager.
Are you aware of R.J. Mancini supporting any candidate, and we can argue about the degree that he supported Gene Schmidt, but any candidate other than Alan Freeman or Gene Schmidt?
Other than Alan Freeman or Gene Schmidt, not to my knowledge.
Okay. When Luke Householder got moved out of the motel, where did he go?
Somewhere in one of the races in the Dayton area. I don't remember which one.
Okay, and then again, do you have personal knowledge that he stayed in a motel in Dayton then?
We would have set him up in something else, but I don't remember.
That versus like somebody's personal home or something.
Yeah, I believe it was a hotel.
Okay. The door knocking, I think your prior testimony was that one of the responsibilities was that these people would be, I guess if they had the skills, to try to get other volunteers to door knock. Okay? And did that count against their 1,000 quota? Okay, so they had to personally door knock 1,000.
But what the goal was to get 1,000 doors. That was the minimum.
A week. But let's pretend you're familiar with Huckleberry Finn,
Go on.
like Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn. So the concept of, if you can go get a bunch of people to go door knock, like paint the fence, and then I don't actually do any door knocking, but I blow the quota away because I got a bunch of volunteers to go do it for me. That would be, in the Huckleberry Finn world, that would be a thumbs up. And so were there any of your people that you thought were particularly skilled at doing that type of thing, that would try to get, volunteers, groups of volunteers to go door knock, to extend their reach?
They were tasked to go get volunteers and to knock as many doors as possible.
And how would they get volunteers, and how would they coordinate them?
Reach out to your personal networks, the candidates' networks, however you can, local college Republican clubs.
Did you ever attend any of these, any volunteer door knocking event during this cycle?
Absolutely.
Okay. Describe for me real quick, what would typically be how this would be orchestrated?
So candidate A, we call them a Super Saturday. We would try to get volunteers from either locally in the area or, it was a weekend, so if there was house staff who was out of free weekend, we'd drive them and meet in a parking lot and have donuts and go knock doors in the area.
Who provided the donuts typically?
The local donut shop.
Who paid for the donuts typically?
Myself, I would do it at times, sometimes the candidate would do it, just depends. Whatever was done.
Okay. So one of the models for this would be that the candidate would provide donuts, and say you meet up in whatever, the Lowe's parking lot or whatever, have some donuts, I assume there's coffee too, and orange juice, and then you go dispatch people to door knock. If they were volunteers, apart from these people, you know, or staff from the house or something, how did they get direction as to where to go?
So on the app, you can choose from a series of walkbooks, so I would say you go to walkbook 1, and you go to walkbook 2.
So were all of these people that were doing this using that app that you talked about? Okay.
Some of them would prefer paper walkbooks, so if we knew that ahead of time, we would do that.
Would you do that from like a local board of elections site, or you had your own capability
You
to
could do
print a
it from the
walkbook?
app, but that was, I believe, most board of elections have that capability as well.
Okay, but your personal approach to that, was it go to a board of elections or use the app, use the system of which the app was a part of?
Yeah, the campaign software,
You would use the campaign software to develop those lists?
but yeah.
When those events were gonna take place, and let's say you projected that, you know, 10 volunteers are gonna show up. So that means I'm gonna have 10 people, I need to tell them where to go, okay? When you bring the 10 people and tell them where to go, were you the one who would use somebody else, or who would be the person who would say like, well, we're anticipating 10, we need to have them, we need to have, you know, whatever we need, enough donuts for 10, the app for 10, the printouts for, you know, whatever. Was that you doing that pre-planning, or these individual door knockers?
It was a coordination with myself and the campaign manager.
The door knocker, the campaign manager that was in essence mostly a door knocker.
Yes.
Okay. And then and how many of those do you think you took part in?
About 8 to 10.
Okay, so like once per candidate, like a first time, and then
At least,
let,
yeah.
and then let them. Did you participate in one of those for Alan Freeman?
Yeah,
Did you participate in one of those for Gene Schmidt?
I don't recall.
Okay,
I probably did, but.
you probably did.
Her race was in better shape than Alan's was, so
Okay.
if I was down in that area, I was probably knocking for Alan.
And when you did that, would you have done it alongside RJ Mancini?
Yeah.
Okay, so you and so how many times would you say, well, I guess it would only be one, so you would say that, you said you only did 8 to 10 of those, where you personally attended? Okay, and so by that standard, unless you really focus on Gene Schmidt, in your testimony, that you probably only did one of those for Gene Schmidt?
Yeah, that would be accurate.
Okay. And do you remember if, one of the common things is to take pictures? You know, because part of what they go on social media, like look at the big team going out.
Yeah.
Do you remember taking those kind of pictures?
I remember those pictures being taken.
Do you think there were pictures taken when Gene Schmidt did those events?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have those pictures?
Not to my knowledge.
Would anybody have those pictures at this point?
If there was a campaign event, I'm sure there was a picture taken, but I couldn't tell you who would have the picture on the phone.
And I apologize, but I'd like to ask Ms. Fitzmartin to leave the room. I forgot, because we should be having witness separation. Okay. And I just looked back and saw her there, and I thought, oh, she's not supposed to be sitting here right now.
Well, there's no motion to separate that I am aware of.
I'll make a motion to separate.
Or in order, she's been here just for the record throughout the
If he
testimony.
requests separation,
Yeah.
we'd ask you.
No, I think that's right.
Okay. Okay. When you did these knock events that you participated in, did Steve Caraway participate in some, or at least some of them?
At least some of them, yeah.
Okay, and you don't, at this point, I know it's been a while ago, do you have any, I'll ask the question, but do you have any specific memory of individual events, or is it all kind of a blur to you at this point?
It's a bit of a blur, but something might jump out.
Okay, so do you think that when you might have done, or you did one, at least one event with Gene Schmidt, that Steve Caraway was there?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't want you to say something about, like maybe it's not a definitive,
I can't say for certain.
You can't say for certain. I would assume it's been a while, like even I would not remember who was there, you know, on a specific, event. Okay. Last thing is on that exhibit, you probably still have it in your hand. Those people that were, so it's exhibit 6, and then within it, there's an exhibit 3, I think. Of those people that are listed in exhibit 5, within there, exhibit 5. Okay, so it says page 41 at the bottom. Do you remember what candidates any of those other people were working with?
Yeah, Brandon Hendrickson worked for Representative Brindell.
Skip Mancini, we don't know.
And Will Armbruster, if I remember correctly, was with Representative Young.
Okay. Did you ever provide any information to either candidates or to Anna Lippincott, which I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, did financial type stuff, on how much time each of these people were spending with individual candidates?
I mean, it wasn't like billable hours, but that was, can you repeat the question?
Did you ever provide either the candidate or Anna Lip, or somebody within Constant, or in JPL and Associates? Did you ever provide them with information on how much time or effort each of these people were spending with each candidate?
That was not a topic of discussion, no.
Are you aware of in-kind reporting requirements?
I know it exists. I am not a financial person, so I don't know all that entails that.
Okay, if I said, what do you think the in-kind reporting requirements are for a political candidate, what would your answer be?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Who within JPL and Associates or the HRCC?
That would have been Anna.
Anna would have done that? Did Anna ever ask you for information on what candidates these people were working with?
Oh, we set candidates for campaign managers up with specific candidates, so she would know that this candidate or this campaign manager is working for this candidate.
Okay. And you're saying that you were never asked, nobody ever asked about a division of time for a particular resource? Like they spent half their time with this candidate, half with this one?
Not to my recollection.
And to your experience, would it be fair to say you're not generally familiar with what the campaign finance reporting requirements are?
Correct.
For that? Okay. Did the ORP ever provide you with any education as to what the reporting requirements were?
No.
Did you ever ask for any information on what the reporting
I did
requirements
not.
were? Okay. At this point, what did you say? What did you say your job was now?
Now, I
Yeah.
work for the Ohio House of Representatives.
And what role or who do you work for?
I work for the Majority Caucus as a policy advisor.
Now, is there a specific person you say, this is my boss?
Yes.
Are you familiar with, it's been years, are you now familiar with the in-kind reporting requirements for candidates or not?
No.
Okay. Immediately following your tenure in the 2020, when did your work with the HRCC end?
About June 29th, thereabouts.
So at the conclusion of the extended primary, basically, not the general?
Whenever the indictment or the arrest of Speaker Householder took place.
Were you, as part of that indictment you just referenced, were your records sought by anybody as part of that?
Nobody ever reached out to me.
Okay, so, and when that happened, before that happened, did you have any personal suspicions that something improper or untoward was happening?
Never once.
In campaign finance? Okay, and after that point, after the indictment, since then, have you come to realize, how you can't whoa, now I realize that, I didn't realize then, but now I'm seeing some things. Did you have any revelations like that afterwards? So in your mind, you never saw anything that was questionable from a campaign finance standpoint?
Correct.
Okay, but by your admission, you're not familiar with the in-kind reporting requirements in campaign finance? Okay. And did you have any significant rules that would involve compensated activities, you know, other than resources? You did like things like mailers, commercials, you know, that kind of stuff. Did you have any role in compensated activities that were other than, you know, as far as you understand, other than these campaign manager door knockers?
With the exception of sometimes I would help write mailers because Megan wanted to get me experience and some other things, but other than helping draft some mailers, that sort of thing, I had very little role in anything else. I was the field guy.
Okay. And where, I'm not trying to, you know, like, were at the time, I don't care where you live now, but were you like located in a particular area, like Central Columbus, because that was the hub? How many meetings did you participate in with like the speaker on this?
I did something face-to-face with Speaker Householder a handful of times.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then the people you were working with mostly were Megan and Anna and
Mr. Longstreth.
Mr. Longstreth. Okay. And how many meetings with Mr. Longstreth would you say you attended?
I mean, I saw him on a day-to-day, on a regular basis, but as far as meetings go, other than, I don't recall specific meetings, but
Okay.
I'm sure we had strategy sessions or something like that.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Now, he asked you questions.
Yeah, you're not that easy.
That was really slick.
I will be quick, however, unlike,
Again, editorial.
Yeah, no,
Mr. Rolfe, based on your direct examination, you had no knowledge of any in-kind reports for any of the candidates in those House primaries, correct? Including no knowledge about in-kind notices to Gene Schmidt, correct? And Exhibit 3 that Mr. Hicks asked you about is an email from Mr. Carraway to a number of people, including you, that said that Mr. Mancini had been added as a poster on Ms. Schmidt's Facebook page. You recollect that?
Correct,
And as far as you know, did Mr. Mancini ever post anything on her Facebook page?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And objection. This is unless you have. Not that my knowledge is a generalization answer. The answer is either you know or you don't know.
It is, I move to strike. I don't think you're running this show.
I'm allowed to make an objection, not
Okay. Answer the question. Do you or not?
Do I or not recall?
Did you, I think the question, if I could repeat
I
it,
do not know.
is, do you know or not know whether or not Mr. Mancini posted on Ms. Schmidt's
I
page?
do not know.
You do not know either way.
Correct.
Correct. The other thing is the March 12th email from you to a group of people, including Mr. Mancini, advising him of polling location changes in Claremont County, including as it relates to Ms. Schmidt's campaign. That was for the March 17th primary date, correct?
Yes, correct.
If you need to look at it, go ahead and look at it. There's a March 12th email saying polling locations have been changed, please check, please update. From your participation in the primary, there was no primary on March 17th, it was canceled, correct?
Correct.
So that notice to people about changing polling locations certainly is irrelevant in your mind.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, I move the questions. Thank you, sir.
Any questions from commissioners?
Yeah. Mr. Rolfe, going back to Exhibit 5 that Mr. O'Brien was just talking about, where we have Young, Schmidt, and Rendell on the locations. I guess my question is, if the Republican Party didn't endorse Mrs. Schmidt, then why, per your testimony, why were you monitoring her race?
Because she was endorsed by the Speaker Householder.
I do have one question. Same email. You mentioned it was about polling locations, it really is, but the last sentence below is a list of those changes in that will affect our teams. So what was the effect, how would that implies to me that it was gonna impact some activity, right? It wasn't just an update at point of location, it was gonna impact an activity of the team. What activities was it gonna impact?
Relevant activities would be making sure that folks who were in that voting precinct knew, so when you're knocking doors, that you could let people know that their voting location had changed, or if you were going to pass out campaign literature, of course, 100 feet away at the polling locations, make sure that our campaign managers knew not to go to this location if they were going to go to that one.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? We'll go for that.
No cross?
I know the questions,
Now you're dismissed.
thank you, Mr. Wall. You're,
You're excused.
Yeah.
I would prefer this witness not be excused,
Oh,
which means he can leave, but I could recall him later.
Basis?
Because I think there might be subsequent testimony in from Stephen Caraway that will cause there to be additional questions from Mr. Mancini. Not Mr. Mancini, Mr. Rolfe, I'm sorry, Mr. Rolfe.
I believe they ought to be asked here today. I mean,
I have to hear Mr. Caraway's testimony first. There's been some testimony here, and there's emails on which he was copied, and it would be normal for me to be able to recall the witness. What is a exception is that you can excuse them saying, I'm giving up my right to recall a witness.
You may be dismissed, you may be recalled, depending on the circumstances. Be aware.
Would you like me to wait outside?
No,
That's a future.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so it's 4:56. We have 4 minutes. What would you like to do?
If you have a hard stop at 5, I would say we have a hard stop, because my
If it's a
question
hard
for her is
stop,
probably the
we need
same
that.
time range as is for Mr. Rolfe.
I think, I mean, public access to the building kind of limits to a degree. I mean, certainly, and I know we have other commission members that have certain things going on. And so I think 5 o'clock is probably a good cutoff time. I'm going to suggest that this matter be continued to September 14th.
I'm probably gonna be in session then.
Good, you'll be open Columbus.
Okay, well, I mean,
But the
Well,
the question
And
becomes,
the
can
editorial
I, can I just say something? No? Okay, you do the talking, okay.
Well, at least this is, as the commissioners are well aware, it's been going on for a year and a half, and at least, I thought we would be able to get through it last time. We didn't. We are now unable to finish today. I'm just wondering, I don't know, I assume you have meetings between now and September 14th. I guess I would just like to urge the commission to fit it in
there are
on the next
meetings,
year.
but there are members that can't be present during some of those.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And I object to the characterization that this has gone on for a year and a half. This has gone on since May 4th.
Okay,
and
but, all right,
so-
so we understand your position. Thank you, HR.
Sure.
Set the meeting time on the day.
Yeah, I mean, that's my inclination is, 'cause, I mean, as I look at the commission schedule up ahead, that's the next available date that would seem appropriate. That's why I'm saying September 14th. And I appreciate your concerns, Ms. Schmidt. We can, we'll just have to work around those.
Okay, thank you.
At this point, with no further business before the commission, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries with a vote of 7-0.